Back and forth. Hello, my fellow Alaskans. How are we all out there doing today in Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and by tomorrow afternoon, Rumble? Land out there. Are you guys ready to rumble? We are here tonight to be able to listen to Senator Robb Myers and Representative Kevin McCabe. They're going to be battling it out why we should be voting yes for the Constitutional Convention, the opposition to the party that was supposed to show up here tonight. And I'll just do a quick little pan over here so that you can see. You got, I can't even pronounce the first person's name, but I'll say Ira Pritz and Matt Shuckero. They were invited. They are the constitutional folks that say they need to protect our Constitution. You know, that big, dark money that they have floating around out there, the stuff that they say doesn't exist, the $3 million plus campaign that's flooding the airwaves. They decided not to show up. This is the second debate that they've been invited to show up to, and once again, they have not. Starting at about 7:30, we should have Nick Begich and Chris By for Congress, and they will be battling it out, discussing what is the status of our Alaska resources and the oil in Alaska. Definitely stay tuned. If you're not liking and sharing videos like this one, you're one of the people that's causing the problem of having us one of the least likely to vote in people that actually care about Alaskans and not the special interest. You guys can help out by sharing this video right now. Take a moment and do that. Would be greatly appreciated. The debate is about ready to begin here in just a little bit. You can kind of maybe hear in the background people that are working hard to get things rolling so that you guys can all watch this out there on your favorite channel. And again, we're going to be listening to a conversation today about why we should be voting yes and the opposition to the reason, the big campaign that we see all over the airwaves, vote no. Again, I'm going to point out the yes side, there's the yes side, and there's the no side. So it just gives you a great idea of where we all stand at right now here in this particular portion of this debate, and it should be starting here real shortly. So please take a moment, like and share this video. Greatly appreciate it that you do, because you'll be helping get the most of Alaskans to be informed and educated before they cast their ballot. So that way they know that they're voting in people that are working for Alaska and not the deep state swamp that want things to be in their pocket, not ours. All right, you guys, I'm going to go ahead and quiet on down and let things get rolling here in just a little bit. All right, hopefully the new microphone is up and running. Just double check there. Hello, everybody.
You know, we don't get this vote, I'm going to blame both of you.
That's what I'm worried about.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I'm worried about. If I sink, you're going down with me, buddy.
It's fine. I'll bring the beer.
And we're going to take Rick Davidge with us.
Yeah, exactly.
Or you know what, if we lose, I think, you know, the best thing that we could do, we could see if we can get Michael appointed to the Senate. He
All right, just as I was pointing out here just a second ago, there is the opposition. There's the names nice and clear now for you guys all to be able to see. This is the convention, Defend Our Constitution, the ads that we see running all the time, the deep, dark state money, the $3 million flooded in our state telling us how we're to vote from out of state. And here is the two that are here for the convention. Yes, as you can see, they are well represented today. Senator Robb Myers and Representative Kevin McCabe, and then we have Forrest Nabors, political science major doctorate at University of Alaska. Thank you guys all for being here today. Please make sure to like and share this video. They are just about ready to get things started and rolling here. And again, the opposition, the ones that are paying all those advertisements telling us how to vote, are not here tonight.
Okay. Well, we may be playing to the online audience more than physical. Yeah, they might,
Well, good evening, everybody. Testing. Is it working? How about there? Well, good evening. I'm Ray Craig, president of the Media Research Center of Alaska, and this is our 22nd year. We're assisting in information events that are needed to fill the voids and gaps in media coverage of important issues like our critical election next Tuesday. We're pleased to co-sponsor with the Alaska Freedom Alliance this evening's two essential conversations. First, Senator Robb Myers and Representative Kevin McCabe, seated to my left, will discuss the merits of a constitutional convention. We'll take a 10-minute break, and then about 7:30, we'll look forward to hearing U.S. House candidates Chris By and Nick Begich. You'll see empty chairs in both of our sessions, and we've had weeks of engagement to fill them. We wanted both sides to have the opportunity to ask the other side revealing questions. Apparently, those absent are afraid to defend their positions. That itself is revealing. Our moderator for both sessions will be Dr. Forrest Nabors, Associate Professor and Chairman, Department of Political Science at UAA since 2011. The focus of his scholarship has been on republicanism with a small r and constitutional government. His views are attracting increasing attention and support across the country, and he has published the first of 3 volumes on America's great political resets, from oligarchy to republicanism, the task of reconstruction, the great task. His second is forthcoming on the American founders of 1776. And then our evening is going to conclude with comments by Michael Chambers, a director of the Alaska Freedom Alliance. So, okay, let's kick off this critical constitutional convention discussion. I'm asking our panel to address 2 gaps in the ConCon public discussion so far. Number 1, 67% versus 50%. Remember those numbers. We've had decades of paralysis and can't get dozens of reforms done in our state. At least some critical amendments to our Constitution must happen in order to do this, but they can't, because you have to have 67%, basically 2/3, I'm rounding, to do it through the legislature. But you need only 50% in 2 different votes to do it through the ConCon route. In our politically divided state, you will never get that 67% in our legislature, which is well captured by special interests. Many things are broken and cannot be repaired by any legislative amendments. For one, we're not educating kids and wasting enormous amounts of money. That actually is a human rights abuse that's been continuing for decades. Number 2, resource industry regulatory certainty. One major industry has said its no on ConCon position is solely based on its desire to have regulatory certainty. My reaction is that all of us have to remember that we are citizens of the wider community and have to consider this issue as more than just what's best for business stability. I strongly support the health of our essential resource industries in Alaska. They obviously are our lifeblood. I've spent 2/3 of my career working on oil and gas projects, and later on in life, I've wound up owning one of Alaska's greatest historic mines. By the way, historic means it produces no income. So, blockages to reform, 67% versus 50%. Which is the most realistic pathway? Let's note that voters have made the right choices for a healthy resource industry in Alaskan direct democracy. Example, Alaskans said 65% no to Measure 6 in 2006 on the gas reserves tax. And by 56% no, rejected Measure 4 in 2008 that was anti-Pebble Mine. So, now to you, Dr. Nabors.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you, Mike Chambers of the Alaska Freedom Alliance and Ray from the Media Research Center of Alaska for organizing this event. I am joined at my immediate left by Senator Robb Myers, who represents his senatorial district is in North Pole, North Fairbanks. He's been a legislator since 2021. He was raised in rural Fairbanks and is now the father of 5 and is a truck driver. At my far left, Representative Kevin McCabe. Oh, both of them are Republicans, I should point out. His district is in Knik and the Big Lake area. He's been a legislator also since 2021. He has been a long-haul cargo jet captain, served in the United States Coast Guard, and is the father of 3. Now, before we begin, I wanted to mention 2 things. One is that there should be available, circulating around the audience, 4x6 cards for you to write down questions that you would like me to forward to our 2 pro-constitutional convention speakers. So feel free to request one when you would like. And secondly, I do want to just talk about my role here very briefly. You will note this evening I might prod them, I might probe them, looking for a weak spot in their argument, and I might exploit that viciously. I might be sympathetic and try to draw out their arguments more. My position on this question, my own personal vote, is settled. I know which way I'm going to vote. But what is far more important this evening is that I moderate and facilitate this discussion about this issue well. That matters far more to me than sharing with you, revealing to you. It's far more important than revealing to you how I want to cast my vote. And so I'm going to do that. This is the 3rd of these debates that I have moderated. In the last one, which was held on Zoom, I noted that people on both sides of the question accused me of bias. So I think I was, doing something right, and hopefully, since they're gone or absent, I might try to stand in for them a little bit if I can. There. So let's begin. I believe that Ray kicked off this debate with some questions, and if you'd like to start from there or give your sort of general case, each of you, about your position, that would be welcome.
All right, well, I'll go ahead and start with that. So first off, what I want to get across about the Constitutional Convention is that This is primarily not about issues, this is primarily about a process. And it is a process that is normal, and it is a different process than the legislative process, because the no side is constantly telling us, well, we have a process to amend the Constitution. You do amendments through the legislature, and that's happened multiple times through our state's history, and yes, that's true. But there are times when that process breaks down, and we're in one of those times. A constitutional convention, I think, has been said multiple times for multiple debates over the last couple of months. You've seen approximately 230 constitutional conventions across the country at the state level since our founding. The most at one state was in New Hampshire, which I believe was 17 constitutional conventions, and they're still working off of the same base document that they've had since 1780. It's the second oldest constitution in the country, even after all of those constitutional conventions. So this is a relatively normal process. It would only be the second one in our state's history, but hey, 60 years, lots has changed, and it's time for us to sit down and say, hey, does the document that we started with, does it still fit the situation that we are in now? We started off as a relatively poor state, pretty spread out population, pretty sparse population. Well, our population is still pretty sparse. It has grown significantly, and it's much more concentrated in the South Central region. Back in the 1950s, our economy was based primarily, honestly, on renewable resources. It was timber, fishing, some tourism, things like that. And now our economy is based primarily on non-renewable resources, mining, oil and gas, things of that nature as well. And so does our Constitution still fit the circumstances that we're in? We used to be a poor state, now we're a very rich state. The original question we had was, how do we manage the resources that we have and grow? Now a big question we have is, how do we distribute the wealth that we have? And does our Constitution adequately address that? So I've been focusing primarily on the fiscal issues, the financial issues that our state has been facing, whether we're talking about the permanent fund dividend or we're talking about a spending cap, things of that nature, dedicated funds, other things like that. And through this process with the legislature, we have really reached an impasse. And I don't think the no side has said that that our problems don't exist. What they've said is that we can address them. Well, we've been trying to address them for the last 6 or 8 years through the legislative process, and it's going nowhere. And Ray mentioned the one difference between a constitutional convention and the legislative process is the legislative process has that 2/3 vote, whereas a constitutional convention would be able to pass an amendment through strictly a majority vote. And that's one difference, and it's a significant one. But there's another difference as well, is how a convention operates and the reasons that people would be delegates and what they would be looking at is a very different environment than the environment inside of the legislature. In the legislature, we are focusing on this year's budget. We are focusing on our re-election every couple of years. And because of those types of constraints, it really forces us to think short term. We're not thinking about what our policy is doing 30, 40 years down the line most of the time. We're thinking about what's this do this year, what's it do next year, how does this affect my re-election? Short-term questions like that. And it really makes it difficult for us to stand back and get a larger view, a larger picture, and say, really what needs to happen here? If we take this policy that we have been implementing, what's it going to do in 20 or 30 or 40 years? Now, a Constitutional Convention is different because you're talking about electing people for one time with one piece of business on the table. They're not going to be thinking about, hey, how's this going to affect my re-election? What they're going to be thinking about is, how does this affect the future of our state for the next 20, 30, 40 years? They're not looking at this year's budget. They're not looking at the day-to-day administration of our state. They are looking at the big picture of how does this affect things as a whole. That's going to get you a very different set of people. It's going to get you a very different mindset in that process. I think you're going to get a different type of person. While our Constitution states that a legislator can be a Constitutional Convention delegate, and I'm sure that a few of them will try to, I think that you're going to see a lot of our friends and neighbors that really would not normally get involved in the political process step up to run for delegates as well. How many times do you look at your neighbor and say, hey, you're a smart guy, you'd be good at this political thing? And he says to you, heck no, because I don't want to put my life on hold for 4 months every year to go to Juneau. I don't want to bare my soul to the public every couple of years for an election. But you look at him and you say, would you stand for election once, put your life on hold for about 3 months, and then come home, and you can make this a better state for your kids and your grandkids a couple of generations down the line. I think you're going to get a lot more and a different type of person that's going to be interested in stepping up to a ConCon rather than running for the legislature. So again, this is primarily about process to solve our problems. This is a very different type of process that I believe gives us a much better chance of success at solving a lot of these problems, that gives us a chance to have some frank and open discussions without sitting back and going, hey, what's this going to do to my re-election 2 years from now if I say this crazy thing that might make some people mad at me back home. And because of that, I think we're going to have a much bigger chance of success, and I hope that people vote yes. So,
Kevin? Thanks, Rob. So I'm going to shift gears just a little bit, and I didn't do near the research in New Hampshire and other states and the other that Rob has apparently done, but I did talk to many of my constituents, and I'm a little bit more concerned with the nuts and bolts. So I believe that the current path that Alaska is on leads to an unlimited government. It's funded primarily by the permanent fund, and I just wonder why Alaskans would ever permit this. It's headed down the path of socialism. Keep in mind that oil is not a revenue stream, it's a fixed asset. Eventually it's going to go away. So the permanent fund was set up as a revenue stream to fund government. But I don't think it was ever envisioned to be the only way to fund government. Once the fund's spinning off enough money to fund most of the government, the state government no longer needs resource wealth. So bye-bye mining, bye-bye fishing, bye-bye Reardon Steel, if you've read Atlas Shrugged, and bye-bye anything but the little amount of oil that we have left. And then the permanent fund is funding the whole government. If government takes over more of the economy and is funded by Wall Street through the permanent fund, we won't need resource development. We won't even really need a private sector. My good friend Tom McCabe had a most excellent floor speech in the last session where he said, and he's an oil field engineer, he said, I am very worried about the private sector if we focus on this. The private sector, a robust private sector in our economy is very important. I think if the permanent fund takes over as the major funding source, the private sector is going to go away. I'm a little unclear as well why some of the industry groups who are lined up against the Constitutional Convention would oppose it simply based on the uncertainty of regulation. I saw a postcard that they sent, and they said they're uncertain about the regulations, so they just don't want to do it. Right now, we defeat many resource regulatory schemes because the legislature and the public recognize that we would be slitting our own throats by removing both the revenue that the industry brings brings to the state, as well as the associated economic activity. In my opinion, without a ConCon, and based on the last 3 decades of an ineffective legislature, the uncertainty, the regulatory uncertainty is absolutely certain. We will have regulatory uncertainty. We'll have a $120 billion permanent fund. Population will shrink as people leave. We'll have 30,000 possibly state employees and some menial workers to put gas in our cars and to provide fast food for us. And they may or may not show up for work, frankly, and we will be headed down the path that Atlas Shrugged, that Ayn Rand envisioned with Atlas Shrugged. We will be a socialist economy. We also would have no reason to challenge the feds on their regulations or overreach, let's just roll over and let the feds give us money, give us a tummy rub. In fact, the legislature might even pass some of its own regulations that harm business, that harm resource development. The unchecked government and dysfunctional legislature, far from just overtaxing private business, would simply regulate them out of business. We don't need to. We have a $120 billion sovereign wealth fund that provides for every need, so bye-bye. I agree with what Senator Meyer said. Being in a campaign mode right now, I realize that I've been in a campaign mode for the last 2 years. Every vote I take, I think about how it's going to affect my reelection. I think that's standard political issue, standard way politics works. In fact, it's the way it's supposed to work. As a representative, I'm supposed to be closer to the people. I'm supposed to be campaigning from the day I step into the legislature, because I'm supposed to be talking to my constituents and seeing how they want me to vote. So if I'm campaigning all the time, if I am thinking about how my vote affects my reelection, am I doing it right? Am I doing it right for the state? Am I doing it right for the long-term sanity, fiscal viability of this state? Or am I just doing it for election? And I agree that a constitutional convention delegate will only be doing it one time. And he'll be able to pass things with a 50% margin. 21 votes in the legislature is what it takes. As Ray said, 50% plus one. They'll be able to pass things, and they will be ultimately close to you, because when you elect a delegate, you will tell them what you want. Even the uncertainty of resource regulation can be mitigated by talking to the delegates and saying, this is what we would like to see, or this is what we don't want to see. To me, the conversation needs to be had. The people, we are a state that is ruled of the people, by the people, and for the people. And for a bunch of outside money to stand up and say, well, yeah, that might be true, but you shouldn't do it. I don't think that's right. I think the people need a voice. When I talk to people, when I'm running, when I'm campaigning, I tell them, my vote is not mine, it's yours. So you tell me how you want me to vote. Well, this is your constitution as well. It belongs to the people. It doesn't belong to the 1630 fund. It doesn't belong to the National NMEA. It doesn't belong to ASME. It doesn't belong to SEIU. It belongs to the people of Alaska. And I think it's time that outside money get out of our state and let us make our own decisions. I'm tired of being a social experiment, if you want to know the truth. I'm tired of being influenced by outside money. And I think Alaskans need to stand up and take the bull by the horns and say, this is my Constitution. Thank you.
I think most Alaskans will probably agree that gridlock is bad and that the dystopian future that you just described, Representative McCabe, is not something that we want here. But I wonder if you both could explain how the form and structure of our government under this state constitution is to blame for gridlock and for leading our government down this path towards that dystopian future.
So it's not just about gridlock and stuff. I mean, a representative government is meant to move slowly. And we recognize that because we don't want them to run over people's rights. We don't want them to be, efficient dictators. But a constitution doesn't just put out, how a government operates. It also talks about their powers and their responsibilities. It talks about what they can and can't do. And so, for example, in the 1950s, we didn't think about putting in a spending cap. Spending caps were I don't believe they were really an issue yet. That didn't really start to become an issue until the 70s and 80s across the country. And it really wasn't an issue in Alaska because why have a spending cap when you have so little revenue coming in? That was the concern at the time, is were we going to have enough economic activity within the government or within the state to fund the government? And that's one of the reasons that Congress was skeptical about making us or about allowing us to become a state. Well, now we're on the opposite side, and we're saying, well, now that through the permanent fund, the government has enough money to effectively dwarf any other economic activity within the state. We got, I think the permanent fund as of yesterday was somewhere around the neighborhood of $74 billion. And about a year ago, it was touching 83. And the result of that is going to be that Alaska's legislature is no longer going to care about the private economy. Your average person, I'm going to take a wild guess and say that whether you're the CEO of the company or the janitor, you pay attention to your company and what business it's in. Because even if you can't affect it, that is where your livelihood comes from, and that's what you're going to pay attention to. Because you want to know what's coming down the pike. The legislature, we do the same thing. Every year, we have hearings on what oil is doing. We have hearings on the production. We have hearings on where prices are, where we think they're going to go over the next couple of years. Because that is where our money has come from for about 50 years now. What we don't have is we don't have hearings on the economy. We don't have hearings on what's the job market look like. What's economic growth in the state looking like here over the next couple of years? The closest we got to that was this year. We had a hearing in Senate Finance talking about employment, but it was addressing two things. One was it was talking about what our unemployment trust was looking like as a result of everything that's gone on with COVID. And the other thing was we were talking about, do we have enough workers in the state to take advantage of all that federal money that's coming in from the infrastructure bill? So really we were talking about state finances. We weren't talking about what's the economy for the general person look like, because the state government doesn't have to care. What I'm concerned about is as we move towards a place where the permanent fund is providing the vast majority of our state's finances, we're not going to care about oil either. We're going to care about what's happening on Wall Street. We're going to have hearings about what the stock market's doing. We're not going to have hearings about how the private economy is doing. We could regulate the private economy out of existence because we don't need it anymore from the legislature's perspective. And it's very concerning to me. It goes back to what Representative McCabe was saying about we can just have a government with a trust fund spinning off money to fund the government, and we've got economic problems in the state. Well, let's come up with another state program to do it. Not let's grow the private economy. It's let's create another government program, or let's see what the feds can do about this. Let's try to get some money in from the feds. And that's very concerning to me. That's just talking about a spending cap. We keep our spending down, and the permanent fund dividend, as related to that, is you take what's coming off of that fund and give it out to individual Alaskans so that we get Alaska's resources into the hands of Alaska's people rather than into the hands of Alaska's government. That then grows the private economy, and that helps keep our public economy smaller. And ultimately, we have to talk about those sorts of things in how our government is restrained through our Constitution by things like a spending cap. Another issue, dedicated funds. We have a clause in our Constitution that says you can't dedicate the money from any tax or license to a specific program. And we've said, well, our founders were smart in that, because they realized that as you start dedicating these funds, once you dedicate one thing, then the appetite comes in and says, well, let's dedicate something else and dedicate something else, until the legislature really has no control over the finances of the state anymore. We're only going to have a fraction of our money as something that we can actually address because it's all already been dedicated. Well, what we have done, and through a Supreme Court decision from last year, what we are preparing to do is effectively the same thing, except that instead of doing it through dedicating a tax, for example, dedicating the gas tax to go to the highways, instead of that, what we're doing is we're creating all of these little trust funds and saying we're going to dedicate the proceeds of that trust fund towards this government program. We've protected the PCE program last year as a result of that Supreme Court decision. This year, we protected a fund for the Marine Highway System, and we protected a fund for higher education, so for students getting college scholarships. I'm not saying that those things are bad in and of themselves, but as you start going down that path where you are having these little trust funds that get spun off and now are self-funded programs, what do we have left? Our legislature no longer has control over our state's finances. And so it's structural issues like that that we have to address in our Constitution, and that a constitutional convention is one way in which we can address those things. The problem is the legislature doesn't have the will to do that. It's not going to pass a spending cap because that limits their authority, their ability to do things. They're not going to fix the dedicated funds clause because every time they create one of these dedicated funds, it's very politically popular. But they're not taking the long view and saying, if this is what we keep doing, what happens in 20 years? Well, we have to start taking that long view, and a Constitutional Convention is one way that we do that.
So can you tell that Rob just drove down from Fairbanks with nobody to talk to for the last 5 hours?
6.5.
6.5. So mine's going to be a lot simpler. You asked why gridlock. I think that we can look at the previous history of our country and find out how we got things done when we didn't have any money. We worked together, we helped each other, we raised barns together, we had socials together, we actually worked together. Now that we have a bunch of money, now we're squabbling over money, and we have been for decades. Since we got all the oil wealth, we've been squabbling over money or just spending money. So I think a lot of the gridlock is caused by the money that we have in the permanent fund or the oil wealth coming in. And instead of working together to find elegant solutions that we might be able to put forth without spending a lot of money, we're just throwing money at it. Rob said something, and you'll hear if you stay here for Nick Begich, that resonated with me. Wealth accrues to those who produce. If we just sit on our laurels and allow the permanent fund to fund our government, to fund our lives, we're not going to accrue any more wealth, and eventually that's going to go away. We're just going to be socialist like everybody thinks we are. We have got to get to producing, and we have got to start working together as a legislature and as a people to find ways to solve problems as we have in the past, as our countrymen have in the past.
Okay. Listening to you both, it sounds like, we're terrified of being rich. And that, our sovereign wealth fund, permanent fund is going to grow, and oh my gosh, won't it be terrible? It's going to fund our whole government. Well, to some people, that doesn't sound bad at all. I like the argument, and I had a friend of mine in graduate school, he's from Saudi Arabia. He knew all about sovereign wealth funds that were built up from natural resource extraction, and he said oil has been a great tragedy for our country. And political philosophy too, you read it and say, trust fund babies are bad, if I may paraphrase them. It's bad for our character, it creates soft character, and we become dependent, and we lose the virtue of working and so on, and so that's not healthy. That plow may not scout politically though. Telling the people, well, we got to be careful here because life might be too easy for you. But beyond that, I wonder if we really can achieve that. If it's even possible for the permanent fund to reach those numbers. and for us to, you know, I don't know if that really is a plausible outcome. I mean, you're in Juneau, you know better than I do, but I remember the funding wars from a couple of years ago and saw faculty get slashed at University of Alaska and so on, and administrators. And so I wonder if that's even a plausible future.
Well, the legislature or legislators on finance and in leadership have been saying for at least as long as I've been watching them, they want to grow the fund to $100 billion. Last year, they said, well, maybe $120 billion. So if you think about it, I mean, there's the old adage that says, you know, hard times create strong men, and strong men create good times, and good times create weak men. Sort of paraphrasing there. But the point is, what happens when the market crashes? So we have this sovereign wealth fund, totally dependent on investment, on the market, on sometimes bubble, you know, whether it be housing bubbles or monetary bubbles, or we've invested in another country's money, or there's any number of things, but they're not producing. It's just paper money, it's an investment. So what happens when that crashes and we have created a society of weak men who aren't willing to compromise, who aren't willing to produce? Now is when we have the problem. And I think that's what we are fighting against at this point.
Just shifting gears a little bit, how much do each of the Constitution do each of you think needs to be rewritten? I mean, where are we between a complete overhaul, you know, a new Constitution versus, you know, just a few amendments in your own estimation? How much of it do you think we need to change?
To fix our immediate problems, I would say we need probably 3 or 4 good, well-written amendments. To fix other problems that I see throughout the state, I could see us doing maybe a dozen, give or take. We have, by and large, a pretty good constitution. You know, one of the nice things about being the 49th state is you had 48 other states to copy when you write your constitution. So we did learn from some of their mistakes. So
okay, you sit over there, and I'll sit over there.
So the issue in my mind with the Constitutional Convention is how you get those good amendments, because we're at a place where we're not getting these amendments out of the legislature anymore. It's not going to happen, because the types of amendments that we need are things that are going to limit the legislator's power, or things that by themselves might be a little politically unpopular, but are absolutely necessary to get things, to get the ship righted, to fix our state's finances, and to move us forward. You know, some things, if you put it on a ballot, would be politically popular, like putting permanent fund dividend into the Constitution. Some things, I think, might not be as politically popular, like a spending cap, because a lot of legislators are going to look at that and say, I want to spend money. I have a lot of my constituents that want me to spend money. Because as Representative McCabe was alluding to, when we get that trust fund going, to some extent we've had that trust fund already from oil, how you make a living really changes in your head. You start looking at that huge amount of money that the government's got there and says, well, instead of making a living by providing a valuable service or a valuable product to my neighbors, I'm going to make a living by getting a little piece of that pie coming out from the government. And that's something that we have to fix. And we have a lot of people in this state that's how they make their living. So those types of issues are the things that I think we need to see in the Constitutional Convention, that I believe need to come out. But I don't see the legislature doing those types of fixes anytime soon. And by the time we realize how far down that path we've gone, it might be a little too late to turn the ship around.
A classic example would be the fiscal policy working group that I served on with Senator Shower, and so there were 5 Republicans and 7 Democrats on that. We spent 35 days, almost 80 hours of work crafting a document. Part of that document would have required a 2/3 vote for a constitutional spending cap. As soon as leadership saw that, they put it on the shelf and they haven't looked at it since then, except now in the campaign mode, everybody's bringing it out and dusting it off and saying maybe it would be a good idea. But that one thing, truthfully, the Anchorage or the Alaska Chamber of Commerce for the last decade, the spending cap and the fiscal certainty, fiscal policy has been their 1 and 2 items that they bring to the legislature and say, this is what we want you to work on. Not the PFD, spending cap, fiscal policy. Both of those will take a constitutional convention because obviously, frankly, the legislature hasn't been able to do it for 3 decades. We haven't been able to do it. So I think that it's time to trust the people to lead us, to show us the way, of the people, by the people, and for the people.
So it sounds like, I mean, from both of you, that you see a convention to have very limited objectives.
Mhm.
So it's really amending by another means because it's easier that way. Well, maybe easier is not a respectful enough word to use, but it's available.
Mhm.
And so we might as well try it that way. Why not sell it that way?
So
I mean, why not sell the convention that way? Because if there were if you're both Republicans, if you were able to hammer out a compromise with Democrats behind closed doors before the special interests could get to them,
Mhm.
that would have advanced the fiscal health of this state by a lot, then why not promote it that way and make some friends quietly from the other party who might push it through?
I don't think this isn't just a party issue is a big part of our problem. You know, if you look at just the dividend, for example, that's one issue that we've been gridlocked on for the last half a dozen years. And in the Senate these last years, the dividend split both caucuses. The Republicans couldn't agree on it. The Democrats couldn't agree on it. There's been some talk between the different groups that are pro-PFD or anti-PFD, regardless of party. But either way, there's not enough, going back to what Ray said at the beginning, either way you don't get to 2/3 votes in either the House or the Senate going that direction. And so in large part it ends up being fruitless. So a constitutional convention, again, is another process that we can use to get us to this goal that many people throughout the state see as necessary, and that I think there are so many people that when I go knock on their doors out campaigning, they're sick of the gridlock. They're just looking at me saying, "Fix it, solve it," and I go, "Well, yes, but as soon as you start bringing in those little pieces." I can talk to the Alaska Chamber, for example, and say, yes, I'm all in favor of a fiscal plan, but as soon as I say, well, here's a piece that needs to be in it, then they start saying no. And you end up with the same problem on the other side of the aisle. And so it's time for us to put together a group of people that aren't going to care about their re-election. All they're going to care about is solving the problem and can we get it to pass a vote of the people. And that's what a constitutional convention gets us.
So, Dr. Nabors, one of the things, you said, why not sell it that way? And I agree that we need to sell it always. So, for instance, it's interesting to me that ranked choice voting, we voted that in 2 years ago through Ballot Measure 2. And it's a social experiment, frankly, forced on us by the same dark money that's now trying to convince us not to have a constitutional convention. They said that. And in Ballot Measure 2, they also said, we shouldn't be using dark money. We shouldn't be using outside money. That's what sold it to everybody. And yet they're using outside money to influence the same way. Again, I'm tired of being a social experiment for the rest of the nation. But that passed. We voted it in. We passed it. People passed it. So why are we now so worried about not voting on a constitutional measure that's in our Constitution. It's not outside money, it's not 26 pages brought to us by some outside billionaires that decide that they want to experiment with our election process because they can do it cheaper here than anywhere else. This is in our Constitution. It's allowed for in our Constitution. To me, it doesn't make sense to vote for ballot measure 2 and ranked choice voting and not vote for something that's already put in place by the framers of our Constitution. Another thing that we need to sell, another way we need to sell it, I believe.
We've got 2 questions from the audience. The first one is a comment and an observation and a request that you comment. Alaska Native Corporation leadership and Native leaders have urged shareholders and shareholder descendants to vote no, citing too much progress in areas including education funding, rural subsistence priority, power cost equalization, Alaska Marine Highway. They have even written that a convention could result in dissolution of the Native corporations themselves. Can you comment?
Well, first of all, you can't dissolve a Native corporation through the Constitutional Convention because they're created federally. So the power just isn't there. I think again, with the Constitutional Convention, everything that comes out of a convention has to go to a public vote. And so my first barometer of what's going to pass a constitutional convention is, what are my neighbors going to vote for? I don't see my neighbors voting to do things like restrict our hunting rights, whether you're native or not. I don't see my neighbors voting to restrict and cut back on some of the progress that we've made on education out in the villages or in the urban areas. Either way, what I see my neighbors voting on and passing is fixing our state's fiscal problems. I just have to wonder if some of the Native corporations are kind of falling in line with some of the chambers of commerce and saying, well, they're falling prey to the fear about what could happen. Again, I look at my neighbors and say, what are my neighbors going to vote for? And the fear mongering at that point stops.
I look at my neighbors and I wonder the number of Native people that I'm associated with. There was only one Native on the original convention. One woman?
I think so.
Is that right? I can't remember, but the point is six women.
We got a comment from the audience. We had 6 women out of 55 delegates.
And one Native. So why, now that we have an opportunity for the Native corporations and the Native villages and to step up and be a part of this, I would have thought that the Native corporations would be fully on board with this. They talk about the PCE. The PCE is not being used the way it was supposed to be used. We were supposed to provide power for the villages. We weren't just supposed to socially subsidize their power use. We were supposed to find a way with the PCE to power the villages. We haven't done that because it's easier just to throw money at the diesel fuel that it takes to run the village power. So again, I don't understand why the Native corporations are sort of using that as a hammer. It's the same with the Marine Highway system. Why are they using that as a fear tactic? We absolutely need to resolve some of these problems, some of these fiscal problems, and we need to do it with the people, including the Native people, including the women, including the changed demographics from 1955 to now.
Why do you believe there will be more consensus and agreement when we have the same electors?
So yes, you're, to the person who asked the question, you're correct that the people that elect our legislators would also elect these delegates. 2 big differences though. One is the electoral districts. If you look at the original Constitutional Convention call, and the new Constitutional Convention call would likely mirror it pretty closely. You had some people elected by district, just like we elect legislators. You also had some people elected at large from the 4 judicial districts around the state. And then you had a few people, I think it was 7, that were elected statewide. And that gives you a different perspective. You know, when I go to Juneau, I get elected to represent a certain portion of the state. And my portion of the state is going to conflict, you know, could potentially conflict with his portion of the state or somebody else's portion of the state. And, you know, so you set up some of that natural tension there. Well, some of that natural tension is good. But in a constitutional convention, you're going to get some people, because of the districts that they get elected from, with some more area-wide and some more statewide perspective. And you don't get that in the legislature. Because the only person in Juneau that's got that full statewide perspective really is the governor. And the governor has no role in voting on a constitutional amendment. He can propose it, but he can't vote on it. He can't control the flow through the body, anything like that. All he can stand up and say, all he can do is stand up and say, I think this is a good idea. So that's one issue that's different. The other issue that's different is, again, delegates don't have to worry about re-election. As Kevin mentioned, you go down to Juneau, and as you're pushing that red button or the green button, what's a significant thing that's on your mind every time is, what does this do to my re-election next year? Constitutional Convention delegate doesn't have to worry about that. What they have to worry about is, will this pass a vote of the people? And so it allows for some different conversations to happen, because they're not worried about going back to their jobs. They're not worried about being an incumbent and defending themselves when they get home. They're worried about fixing the problems of the state.
I actually have a little bit different answer to that question, if you will. You know, as a legislator, when I have an idea or a constituent has an idea of a bill, I write the bill, or my office does. I go out and I collect signatures of people that might support it. I personally argue the bill with Senator Myers or with other representatives and see if I can get them on board. So the goal of passing the bill is my goal, a legislator, a single legislator's goal. When you send a constitutional convention, when you send the delegates down there, they have a finite, fixed group goal. They're not going to be offering bills and, well, if it doesn't pass, I'll just offer it next time. They have a goal of resolving what you send them to resolve. But they have a fixed goal of the constitutional amendments. And it's not at all like the legislature, at least the way I envision it. And I've thought a lot about this actually. Why? And the why is because they will go down there as a group to solve problems that you've identified, and they solve the problem. They're not putting forth a bill to create another regulation or another office or even to remove a front license plate. They are putting forth a bill, or they're putting forth the Constitution, which is a fixed document that needs some repair.
Just to change the approach, let's say the ballot measure 1 passes, and then we start this process. Have either of you really thought out how it might go, for example, to form up a shadow convention or shadow conventions, maybe try to get an order of sequestration for the delegates so that, you know, those outside interests can't be hanging out in the galleries, something like that. Have you put any thought into, you know, how you might, what the specific changes might be, you know, listed out your own that you would like to see go in?
Changes to you mean amendments to the Constitution?
Or just, well, you could, if you were there, you could rewrite the whole thing.
Right.
I mean, have you thought about, okay, what would a new and improved Alaska Constitution look like, and how do we get there? And if we win this vote, then how do we take these next steps? We haven't done this in a very long time.
So let me address the last part of your question first. I envision that delegates will be elected town hall style. So we'll have a meeting of your area, have a town hall, well-advertised meeting. People will come up, and people that want to run will have a forum like this where they can put their views out to the town hall, and then you will select a delegate from there, rather than having this big campaign season and the thousands and millions of colored postcards that end up in the trash in the post office. You'll have a face-to-face talking of the people that want to elect, that care about and that want to elect their delegates. So that's how I envision the next process going. And I know that's a big deal to some people. They're saying that, well, as the convention yes people, we don't really have a plan for going forward. Well, that would be my plan, is we need to engage the public, we need to, of course, advertise it, and we need to have town hall selection, in my opinion, of delegates. As far as the things that need to be, that I would like to see fixed, I think the triumvirate of the PFD, the spending cap, and the people's input on taxes should be the very top thing. And you can't have one without the other two. We said that in the fiscal policy working group. We will not accept just doing one of these. You have to do them all together. Otherwise, the people will vote in the PFD, and we won't have any of the other. We won't have a spending cap. We won't have people's input on taxes, and some legislature down the line will vote in taxes. In fact, two of those, the PFD and the spending cap, belong to the people, and the other one limits the legislature. I'm sorry, the spending cap limits the legislature, and the PFD and the input on taxes belong to the people. So there's a number of things that I would also like to see, but I want to give you an example of two things that cause us issues in the legislature and in the state and in the Supreme Court. First one is the single subject rule. So we talked about it a little bit earlier, the single subject rule for bills. So if I'm going to pass a bill, it has to be on a single subject. Well, how did that work for us with ranked choice voting? There was actually 3 subjects in there. There was ranked choice voting, there was jungle primary, and there was dark money. We actually took it to court, and the Supreme Court said, no, the single subject is elections. That seems to me to be pretty broad. Our Constitution allows the Supreme Court to define it that way. I'll give you another example. In the legislature several years ago, there was a bill to do with hairdressers. And they put into that bill, they stuffed an ophthalmology thing and a smoking thing. And the answer, it got to be kind of a joke. It's actually kind of a funny little video to watch, the Senate. They said, well, I guess it's all about the head. Senator Walikowski said that. The single subject was, meaning the single subject was the head, right? Eyes, mouth, and hair. That needs to change. We need to fix that. We either need to do away with it, or we need to more tightly define it so a single subject can't just be the head. And of course, Senator Myers mentioned the third big one for me would be the designated versus dedicated. We need to resolve that one way or the other. We need to resolve that. We can't do it legislatively because it's in the Constitution, and too many legislators have found a way around it. They call it a designated fund. It's not dedicated, Kevin, it's designated. Well, what's the difference? If you look up you can find dictionaries that will define those two words exactly the same. Dedicated, designated, we need to solve it. We need to define it, and that needs to be in our Constitution because it's in our Constitution now. So if I were king for a day and I had to solve some things, those 3 things might be at the top of the list.
Senator, you?
So, I mean, Kevin gave a good list there, and I think I agree with all of them. The one more piece, again, on the financial side that got mentioned by the Fiscal Plan Working Group was potential reform of our constitutional budget reserve, effectively the state savings account. Because the constitutional budget reserve right now, in order to draw money out of that fund, it requires a 3/4 vote from both bodies of the legislature. And unfortunately, what that means most of the time is that some member goes to the legislative leadership right at the end of session and says, hey, in order to get my vote, for you guys to get that 3/4 vote, because you need as many as you can get, I need another $5 million in my district, And it lets an individual legislator or 2-3 legislators together kind of hold the legislature hostage with the budget, really. And so that's something else that needs to be addressed. But otherwise, I think Representative McCabe gave a great answer on what needs to be addressed right now. And if those are the pieces that get addressed and nothing else changes, I will consider that a successful constitutional convention.
Why do you think, could you maybe try to help the audience understand a little better the nature of the opposition to a convention. On the website for Defend Our Constitution, those who oppose the convention, they say Alaska Constitution works. A convention will open a Pandora's box, and they say that special interests will control the convention. What do you think are the real reasons for the opposition and those who have been funding and organizing in this state to prevent a convention?
Well, I look at the opposition, and there's some exceptions to this, but by and large, it's people that are happy with the status quo. It's people that are happy with what happens in Juneau, with how our government operates. And
so you take them at their word because they say Alaska's Constitution works. It works for them.
yeah, exactly, exactly. And they want to talk about how we've got some problems, of course, because they can't sweep those under the rug. But we've got this amendment process, and I'm looking at it and I'm saying, well, with the amendment process, though, quite in many cases, the people that are telling us to vote no on the Constitutional Convention, in a lot of cases, are also the same people telling us to vote no on these specific amendments when we bring them up. So I'm looking at the no side and saying, well, if I'm going to take you at your word and say, well, we have a process that's going to work, I look at you and go, are you going to help us make it work then? Because so far, a lot of the groups that have been telling us no, don't change it, are the same ones that are telling us no, don't find another way to change it. So, I think that it's primarily, again, some exceptions, primarily people that are happy with the status quo. And I think average Alaskans, by and large, are not happy with the status quo. Slow process, people can understand. Gridlock, no progress, having the same debate year after year after year and making no progress, I think people are finally getting frustrated with that.
I think there's a sort of a, not unspoken, but a hidden agenda. And I think it is because some longtime legislators and some industry alphabet soup groups have found ways to circumvent what's in our Constitution. And they don't want those ways. They have found workarounds, whether it be the designated fund idea or a myriad of other ways to work around what's in our Constitution and get done what they feel they want done. And I think that they don't want to upset the apple cart. They found those ways, they're comfortable in those ways, and they would just assume that we not mess with their plan.
So here's a question from the audience. What's to say the delegates to the convention won't be swayed by a barrage of dark money?
Well, my first thought to that is we already have dark money. We have dark money trying to influence our elections. We have dark money trying to tell us to vote no, which first of all tells me that dark money thinks that this is dangerous enough that they need to prevent it from happening, and they won't have as much influence as they would like at a constitutional convention. Second of all, I look at the money that flows around within Juneau. It's pretty sad when over the course of 2 years in Juneau, I think I can count maybe 2 people that came into my office that were just regular constituents that came down to Juneau to come talk to me, whereas almost everybody else that came into my office was a paid lobbyist of some kind. That's another form of money trying to work its way through the legislative process. And so you want to talk about dark money trying to influence the convention? I think they'll try. I don't question that they're trying to influence the vote right now. But I think that they're trying to influence the vote to the no side right now because they realize that they won't have nearly as much influence over a convention as they can have over the legislature.
And, I think, Dr. Nabors, I think that there's a little bit of misconception here with the dark money. The dark money's not, 1630 fund isn't just going to go to a delegate and say, well, they might, but it would be illegal. Here's $10,000. We want you to push this or vote no or vote yes or take a fall, if you will. I don't think that's the way most of us understand that dark money works. Dark money works because the fund comes in and says, hey, we're gonna give you $50,000 for your next election. Or we're gonna hire your relative to do this or to do that. And that's the kind of influence that we need to watch out for. And I think when you have a finite 75-ish day process that's sequestered somewhere in a city, it's going to be a little bit different than it is in the legislature.
Has the Constitution, do you think, created those special interests? So in the last three, inclusive of this, in the last three debates, special interests were referenced even by those who opposed holding the convention. So then the question is, did the Constitution of '56, did it actually establish the conditions and cement it into our organic law that essentially created these special interests? Perhaps by some of the later articles in the Constitution that deal with land use and mineral rights, et cetera, and so forth, that has somehow, I mean, you would know this way better than I would, but that perhaps because of those original provisions, we have laid the groundwork to that, or paved the road towards that dystopian future that you're talking about.
Sure, I'll give you a good example of what I feel was created unintentionally by the framers of our Constitution that has allowed special interests to sort of manipulate, and it's the sweep and reverse sweep. You know, when it comes to like WWAMI, for instance, you know, the funding for WWAMI was part of the reverse sweep, and it allowed it to be leveraged and used as a lever, and maybe it shouldn't have. I mean, WWAMI's an awesome program. Maybe we need to find a better way to do it, but the reverse sweep and the sweep, not only outside interest and lobbyists can use it, but other legislators. The Republican minority did so the very first session of the 32nd legislature, and we knew we were doing it. And that is one of the unintended consequences, I think, of a piece of our Constitution called the dedicated fund piece.
Along those lines, I mean, what Kevin referenced effectively is not saying that this created our Constitution created a special interest. It's that our Constitution created a process that special interests could take advantage of. And what I look at our Constitution and the way our government is set up, even some of the informal rules, not necessarily the ones written down, that's largely what we're fighting here. We're not fighting, this particular piece of the Constitution created this group, because a special interest group is just a group of people that care really strongly about one particular issue and then try to lobby the government on it. I don't necessarily disagree with that. The issue is just when you can't have one issue take over the whole thing, because we got to balance out a lot of issues across the state. One of the ones I got warned about when I first got to the legislature was, don't get involved in the fish wars between the commercial guys and the subsistence guys and the sport fish guys. Be very wary of getting into that one, for example. And that's not something that was created in our Constitution. That is just a nature of what's in Alaska that then tries to influence the political process. What we're trying to talk about up here, especially on the financial side, whether it's the dedicated funds or the sweep as part of the Constitutional Budget Reserve or a spending cap or what have you, is we're trying to limit the areas that special interests can find to influence the legislature. When you've got when you've got a government that controls the largest natural resources in the state and the largest financial resources in the state, you've just given special interests a heck of a reason to go down to Juneau and try to figure out how to get a piece of that pie. Because it's a whole lot easier to try to make one little group of people in Juneau happy to give you money rather than trying to make a whole lot of your neighbors happy with providing an actual productive service or commodity that they want to buy instead. in order to make your living. So what we're trying to limit is we're not trying to limit, oh, this special interest is too big, let's fix our Constitution so that they don't have any power. We're trying to say, let's give special interests fewer reasons and less ability to attack the political process.
Okay. I've got a pro-life rationale for leaving the Constitution alone.
Okay.
And a pro-life reason for revising the Constitution. One is Article 1, I believe it's Section 2 of the, it's either 1 or 2, protects the right, it has the language of the Declaration of Independence in there, which is not in the Constitution of the United States, and referring, securing the natural right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. With post-Dodd, now that the Dodd case has, overruled Roe, that could be construed by a state court, to mean that all abortions are restricted. Because basing the decision on that clause, that section of Article 1 that protects the right to life. Which is the way that slavery was abolished in Massachusetts in, I think it was 1782 in the Quock Walker case or something like that. After the Declaration of Independence, the Massachusetts court said that under the Declaration of Independence and the recognition of natural right in the Massachusetts state constitution, that can't justify slavery. Slavery is effectively abolished. You could make that same case for, so that would argue for leave the Constitution alone post-Dobbs. Don't risk touching that. The other argument, pro-life argument for revising it, is that the privacy clause in the same article of the Constitution, or it's the privacy section, I think, of Article 1, protects the right to privacy, which could be construed to guarantee the right for abortions. So,
Well, in fact, it has been construed that way by our Supreme Court. That's what they used to say that abortions were legal, right, is the right to privacy clause.
in the federal courts, you mean
Well, in
the
the state
Connecticut?
court. In the state of Alaska.
Oh,
court.
okay, I was not aware of that.
So
In the 90s.
that particular clause, at the very end of it, it says the legislatures shall implement this, right? And it doesn't talk about the right to privacy of an individual. It talks about the right to privacy for Alaskans in general. So,
So which way would you lean? I mean, would you say then that needs to be, there has to be explicit language? And
that's a good question. So there are many arguments on both sides. I understand that. Of course, as a conservative Christian Republican, I believe that life begins at conception, and I'm pro-life. Not only that, I'm pro-life. So when I make a decision or when I make a vote, I consider not only the preborn, but the children that are already outside the womb in a family that my decisions might affect. So we need to understand that as a legislature and legislators, that clause in Article 1, you said Article 1, right?
I think it's the Article 1's the Bill of Rights.
Right. So that trumps everything, in my opinion. Everybody in the state deserves the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So it's going to rest on the definition of life. And I don't know that that is in the Constitution or the definition of a person. What's a person? Personhood is the new sort of argument. So I've kind of talked in circles because I really don't know, and it will be up to the people, And frankly, this is where we discuss the 3 votes. People get 3 votes. You get a vote for a delegate of your choice that you pick. You also get to, well, first vote is on the Constitution, obviously, whether or not to follow, and then you get to vote on the delegate, and then you get to vote on their product. So if the product is such that the 51 or 55% of the Alaskans who believe in pro-choice don't like, then likely it won't pass. And that's, you know, that's the way that we run our government. It's by the people, so we will have to accept that.
So I had somebody comment to me a number of years ago when it looked like Roe wasn't getting overturned anytime soon, that one of the saddest parts of the abortion debate was that the way that it had been framed was it was effectively pitting one right against another. And it was the right of life versus the right of liberty, in effect, or in the way that Alaska's Constitution has been set up and interpreted by the Supreme Court, is the right to life versus the right to privacy. And I don't think any of us want to get rid of either of those. But at some point we have to resolve that dichotomy. And we could talk about trying to resolve it with a court case by getting the Supreme Court to define the right to life to mean there is no right to an abortion. But we've already seen what the Alaska Supreme Court has said, and that's over the course of 25-ish years. They've consistently said, no, the right to privacy is paramount here, and it means that you have a right to an abortion. So I believe if you are pro-life, that you absolutely have to have a fix in the Constitution for this, because we've already seen where the debate goes if you're not going to. And if you want to have the right to life enshrined and honored, then it's going to require a constitutional fix to that privacy clause to say that this does not apply to abortion. And otherwise, we're going to keep going around in circles.
On that subject, which is the conduct of the judiciary, this question from the audience is the judicial branch, based on its structure, biased?
Absolutely. We are, you know, our Constitution and our government is set up, the legislature is supposed to be the strongest body. We are supposed to be, we're closest to the people. You vote for me every 2 years. I'm supposed to be out there talking to you as a representative. The legislature, even with the strong governor form of Constitution that we have, the legislature is supposed to be stronger. The judiciary is actually supposed to be the weakest part of that, of the three. And unfortunately, we have allowed, because our Constitution, again, maybe one of the other things that needs to be changed is our Constitution has us select judges by the Missouri plan. The Missouri plan, even Missouri doesn't follow it anymore, but we do. And I think that absolutely that could be one of the things that we need to change to make our judiciary less liberal and less socialist. And they're not doing anything wrong, it's just the way the progression has gone is, you know, you get somebody that's a little bit left-leaning and it's a little bit more liberal, and then they recommend somebody that's even more liberal than them, and it just continues down this path. So I think the citizens are upset with that, I think the people are upset with that, and if it was up to me, I think that there needs to be a constitutional change to the judiciary closer to the people, whether it be through some election process or change makeup of the Judiciary Council. Any of those would be helpful. And it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take decades to fix that. But and I've talked to judges that even agree that this is what has happened to us and we need to fix it. That's certainly a constitutional fix.
It seems that based on the three debates that I've been a part of, and then other ones that I've seen, that the revision of that part of the Constitution and, you know, getting rid of the Judiciary Council is popular amongst the yes votes. for which reason I'm going to publicly state my agreement with you for one thing, which is that a constitutional convention would be a good idea if we could revise the Constitution so that it's easier to amend than to replace. Because we're in this paradoxical, no constitution should be easier to replace than amend. We should be, because, what I'm hearing from most people is sort of, let's work off of this one as a baseline, and then use the convention as a sort of amendment, means. But another question about the Judicial Council here. So.
If I could address that one as
Yeah.
well. I know we're coming up on time here shortly, but
Yeah.
so I got a copy of a book here written by Vic Fisher, the last surviving delegate to the Constitutional Convention, and interestingly, somebody on the no side. But I want to read out of his book here, talking about the process that gave us the judicial selection that we have. And he's talking about a warning that they received from some of the consultants that they had hired, talking about the strong judicial selection that they have. And he says, while they, the consultants, concurred with the basic objectives, those being trying to get a strong and independent judiciary, the consultants stated that, and I quote, "These sections in particular, however, go a long way toward withdrawing the judicial branch from the control of the people of this state and placing it under that of the organized bar. No state constitution has ever done this, no state constitution has ever gone this far in placing one of the three coordinate branches of the government beyond the reach of democratic controls. We feel that in its desire to preserve the integrity of the courts, the convention has gone farther than is necessary or safe in putting them in the hands of a private professional group, however public-spirited its members may be. The consultants then suggested a number of revisions that would, in their view, democratize the proposed system by providing for legislative confirmation of attorney members of the Judicial Council, adding a Superior Court judge and another lay member to the membership of the Council, and other changes. However, the suggestions were not accepted by the meeting of the committee chairman and never reached the convention floor." When you've got a system that hasn't been implemented yet, and the people at the time are telling you, we've got an issue here, and then we're seeing that issue playing out 60 odd years down the line, these guys are pretty smart. Maybe we ought to listen to this and figure out that how we're selecting our judges could use a little revision. I think I'm going to actually stand up to a few of the conservatives that I've talked to and say the Judicial Council actually does serve an important function. First and foremost, in a state court, what you're looking for is going to be competence. You need somebody who knows what they're doing, because the vast majority of issues that come to a state court are issues like criminal cases, probate cases, a business lawsuit, something like that. And there's not going to be major constitutional issues there. There's not going to be major partisan bickering going on. 98% of the business that you deal with as a judge is going to be very dry and boring law, and you need somebody that's good at their job. And the Judicial Council is good at finding that. The problem is that the Judicial Council also, if they want to, has the power to weed out people with political or partisan leanings that they don't like. And so what we need to do is not get rid of the Judicial Council. We need to keep them because they serve an important advisory function. But we need to alter their power structure so that they don't have veto power over who does and does not get to be a judge.
Representative McCabe, Senator Marks, we're out of time, I'm afraid, but I thought that was a very productive discussion, and I'm sorry I couldn't be more combative with you. Maybe next time. We're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we'll be back for the debate with the candidates to the United States House of Representatives, our seat here in Alaska. So 10 minutes, we'll see you back here soon.
All right, all my favorite fans out there, if you haven't liked and shared this video, please do a moment and take a moment to do that right now. It'd be greatly appreciated. Your support has made this day's broadcast possible. Please go to our website and help us out and help us grow, make it to more of these, support what we do. Click that support button and make a small contribution today. It's your proceeds that made today's broadcast possible to all of you. Up next will be Nick Begich and Chris By, both congressional candidates running for office. Make sure again to like and share. They will be up in about 10 minutes. I'm going to leave this broadcast open and running here, and I will be back in just a moment. Take that time right now again to like and share. If you haven't clicked to the link yet for do you suffer from erectile dysfunction or don't know what erectile dysfunction is, please click the link in the description up above and watch the video. That'll definitely kill 5 minutes of your time right now of the wait in between, and I'll be back in just a moment. All right, folks, thank you all for being here and still tuning in. If you're just arriving and getting on right now, please like and share this video. It's people like you that inform Alaskans before they vote and make sure that they are as educated as possible about the issues. This is your chance to make sure we have a fair and free election with educated voters, not those that are just clicking the boxes because that's all they know how to do. Up next is Nick Begich and Chris By. Should have been Sarah Palin and Mary Peltola here also, but they were unable to attend. We already know where Sarah stands at. Her logo automatically says drill, baby, drill. And Mary Peltola, well, she's already in bed with the deep-seated swamp, sitting on committees the first couple weeks she was put into office that's already detrimental to the future of Alaska. And we really do need to vote smart this upcoming election and make sure that we choose wisely when we click that box and rank our ballots, making sure we get educated people into Congress that are going to work for Alaskans, not the deep-seated swamp that is out there. Again, take a moment right now. Please like and share this video. They are just about to begin. Take a moment right now and let's get it done. Thank you all for being and tuning in here today. If you haven't watched our electile dysfunction video or you're suffering from that this year, which hundreds of thousands of Alaskans, millions of Americans suffer from this life-changing, deflating disease every single year. And we at Politic MD worked our butts off to come up with the cure. My Cracker Jack medical team and I have done it, and it is up to all Alaskans, all Americans, to take our cure and cure their erectile dysfunction problems once and for all. Again, please take a moment, like and share this video. We'll be starting here in just a moment.
There's one question. Couldn't get it. Why, basically why, yeah, here it is. How can I trust anyone? 10 information. Why should I trust anyone to do the right thing in this godless I might, yeah, no kidding. Carving the chair. Season. Puberty soccer, cutting off their body parts.
Okay, you guys
There's a whole continuum here. I feel like
Yeah, I think you scared her.
I know I gave one heat.
Forrest Nabors.
I may have said something better here.
Oh, did you? Whoops. All right. A lot of fun. Yeah, this will be. Yeah, it'll be good.
All right, you ready?
Mike?
I'll break it.
So if you, when you're ready to go, just push this out to the
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Forrest Nabors. I am Associate Professor and Chairman in the Department of Political Science at the University of Alaska, Anchorage. And I am joined on stage from my far left. You should be familiar with both of these characters by now, Chris By and Nick Begich, who are candidates for the Alaska seat in the United States House of Representatives. Chris is a regular Fairbanks guy who firmly believes in liberty and freedom for all. He is a father of 4, a combat veteran in the Army. He's an Alaskan fishing guide, youth soccer coach. Nick Begich is a lifelong Republican, co-chair for Congressman Don Young's 2020 re-election campaign and the Alaskan Republican Party's Finance Committee. He manages businesses in Alaska and worldwide. He has experience in both corporate and startup settings. He is a father with 1 son. Ladies and gentlemen, just a few points on the proceedings. 4x6 cards should be circulating out there in the audience. So if you would like to write down a question, the ushers, I suppose, will bring them on stage to me, and I will pass them on to the candidates. Also, I just want to say a word on tonight's debate format. So often in political debates today, there are soundbite wars. The candidate is asked a major policy question and are given 45 seconds to reply. Like last week, I saw them. I saw that debate. I've seen all of these debates, and honestly, there might be a time and place for those. But a debate of this kind is really essential. Because especially given the nature of the problems our country faces right now, it's very important to get to the bottom of what our candidates really think, to get to the bottom of their thoughts, to probe for depth, to challenge a little bit, to facilitate, to really know what they are thinking. And you don't get that in soundbite wars and 45-second debate answers, or in silly ads that flash in front of your screen that says, vote for Steve, he's got wonderful hair, which is how a lot of these go. And we need a thinking citizenry badly, especially at this time in our country. And so what I will be doing this evening is really facilitating a conversation and to ferret out disagreement, but also to clarify what their thoughts really are. So I hope this is going to be conversational and civil. They both have an election to win, so I don't expect them to be in agreement. And I'd also like to point out that our other 2 candidates have not appeared this evening, although they were invited, and I'm genuinely sorry that they did not come this evening. I hope that tonight's debate convinces Alaskans that we need more debates of this kind for statewide office and for federal office when both when our country, including our state, are facing these very serious challenges. So with that said, I'd like to turn it over to the candidates and just ask you, do you want me to just dive right in and ask questions, or do you want to make some opening statements? I think I'd like to throw that open to you if you want. Or
I'm fine with just diving right in.
Yeah.
Personally.
Okay, great.
I got one
Okay.
opening statement. You have good looking hair, Forrest.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
We're worried about hair.
Thank you. Let's see. So if our country was the patient and you were the doctor and the patient was coming in for an annual checkup, how would you describe the general health of our country at this time? And Mr. Begich, if you'd like to go first.
Well, I'd say we're morbidly obese, and we have a major challenge with government that has gotten far too large. I think that is the chief challenge that we face as a nation right now. It's not just government spending, although that is a major piece of what I'm talking about, but I'm also talking about federal overreach. You know, this idea that has sort of crept its way into the American psyche, that government is the answer to all of life's problems. That's not true. And that's certainly not what our framers and our founders had in mind when they set up the United States Constitution. The idea was to define government's role in a narrow fashion and provide the maximum amount of liberty for the individual. And over the ensuing 200 plus years, we've seen the encroachment of big government to the point where now we have an entire generation of people looking at the government every time there's a problem and saying, what are you going to do to fix this? I can't tell you how many times when I'm on the campaign trail, someone comes up to me and says, what are you going to do about fill in the blank, right? And many of the times that they ask those questions, it's not the government's role to fix that particular problem. And we've got to get back to the mindset of individual responsibility, of a government that is limited in scope, and we need to stop vilifying job creators in the private sector, because really, there is no such thing as the private sector, right? There's the government sector, and then there's everyone else. And when we start reversing that thinking and thinking that the private sector is somehow this curiosity that's on the side, we've lost sight of what the priority is. So I would say at the annual physical, we need to slim down, and we'll get a lot healthier when we do.
Okay. Mr. Vai?
I would say we're probably cancerous. That's probably the best way to explain it, right? I mean, currently, right now, if it moves, you tax it. If it works, you regulate it. If it's broke, you subsidize it. I mean, literally, that is the goal of our federal government. And it really doesn't matter what that thing that works or that thing that moves. It just doesn't really matter. They're going to find a way to tax it. And it doesn't really matter which party's in control. They're going to find a way to regulate it. They're going to find a way to tax it. And that's why we're running. That's why we've got a whole handful of people running, because we have given the opportunity to both teams, and both teams have found ways to regulate it. They have found ways to subsidize it. They have found ways to tax it. And in some cases, they found ways to break it. I look at a good example of this would be like our foreign policy. You know, the United States, DC, United States government is more concerned about spending money than it is about freedom and liberty. Not just here, but abroad as well. And I've seen that firsthand. I've seen when the State Department hands out stacked of $100 bills. Right? And that was under a Republican administration. Like, there's no excuse for that. I have seen that when it was a Democrat administration. There's no excuse for that. So at the end of the day, what exactly are the 70% of Alaskans who don't vote supposed to do? I mean, I think Michael Duke said it best this morning. It's the same stinking bird with two wings, and each wing belongs to the bird. And sooner or later, we're going to be the ones holding the bag. Actually, it'll be our kids. It'll be that youngin' right there who's going to be holding that bag. And I simply cannot hold my nose and settle for the lesser of two evils again. I won't. I encourage you not to as well. As far as how to fix it, I'm sure we'll get into it. I obviously believe that individuals can make the fix. I don't think federal government federal government can't fix anything except for more taxes and more regulations. That's what they do. But I mean, we can debate that, I guess, as we go.
Well, it seems you are both indicating that size is, the government, it spends, it's grown bloated, it's obese. Have you noticed any really significant changes in government besides just, this growth? I mean, what I sort of am sensing from the American people and from the Americans here in Alaska is that they feel like we've turned some kind of a corner over the last few years that's deeply distressing. And that something has happened that they're all trying to make sense of. And they can't quite get it, but they know it's important. And it's deeply alarming, and we need to do something about it. Does that track with the way that you two are thinking?
Yes. I'll take this one first.
Sure.
The last president to cut budget and cut the growth was Calvin Coolidge. That's how far back you've got to go. Even the last administration added 4 new entities to the executive branch. And that was the guy we all put our hopes and prayers on, that he was going to fix the system. And even he added people. I mean, the guy we got right now just added 87,000 more IRS agents. Like, It's just insane. I would simply say this. What opened up my eyes the biggest, besides a Republican president sending me to Iraq, is when I was listening to the radio. I think it was Mark or Handy or one of those guys, and they were squawking about the nuclear option that a guy named Harry Reid was now putting into effect. He was basically changing the way Senate rules work from a supermajority to a simple majority. And I remember all the Republicans freaking out about this. And then we gave them everything they needed to change that. And what did they do? Nothing. They did nothing. In fact, they used it to their own advantage. And that right there changed how the United States government finds itself in checks and balances. We no longer have a three-branch government that checks and balances itself. We have a two-party system that checks and balances itself. And that, in my humble opinion, is wrong. Wrong as all get out. Because it fails to meet the requirements of freedom and liberty. All it is just, I mean, Nick's heard me say it a couple times, but all it becomes is a wrecking ball. One party gets the ball and they bring it all the way up here and they drop it, and down below is me and most of this room, and it runs right through us and it comes up to the other side, and then the other party grabs it and they lift it up a little bit higher and swing it faster right through the same group. And each time it's us who get banged up. The chances of my kids or this young one here making the kind of money that this guy makes is probably slim to none because they've already regulated it. The same opportunities aren't going to be there for them because that wrecking ball came through us. And he's no different. I mean, I'm the same way. If I want to get on a river, I have to have a Coast Guard license for most of the rivers in Alaska. And insurance is going to take care of the rest, right? I have to have my woofer. I have to have a whole host of safety courses. And I would do that anyway because I would take care of my clients. But I don't need the federal government to tell me how to do that. You know, that checks and balance thing is really, really, really important. And when we sit down at the ballot box, we really have only ourselves to blame for how this turned out. Because we settled for the lesser of two evils. I'm as guilty as the next. And I, like I said earlier, I'm just not going to do that. I think at the end of the day, when you really look at it, Forrest, that nuclear option, at the end of the day, really, really devastated the way we handle politics.
Mr. Begich.
So I do think that there's been a sense for some time that something is wrong, right? Getting back to the heart of your question, what is that thing? And you know, I think that when we look back at the events the last 3 years, right, specifically, we saw cities that were burning, and the media was saying, oh, this is a peaceful protest. We saw a group take over a downtown, annex a downtown in this country, several blocks. Nothing happened. No one cleared them out. It was just news, right? We know inside ourselves this is not right, and we know the government is not providing its constitutional role on our behalf of safety and security, and the media is complicit in these actions, right? We know that when we're being canceled because we're trying to exercise our free speech, that this is wrong, right? And it happened in the year leading up to the 2020 election. It happened in response to COVID, right? You couldn't question the official narrative. You were not permitted to ask questions. And that's not American. And so yes, it's bigger than, okay, the government's gotten too big. Because the government has gotten so big that it's encroaching on our constitutional freedoms and liberties. And I think this is what people are feeling out in the general public. It's a lot of this idea that, hey, you know, I have rights as an individual and you're taking those rights away from me one action at a time, to the point where I'm afraid for my job, or I'm afraid that I won't be able to get a job if I don't participate in the narrative, if I disagree with the narrative, if I don't take a vaccine, right? This is where we've come as a country, because we've allowed government, getting back to my prior point, to be that solution, that we look to government for the solution to life's problems. Well, they provide it, they say, and then they force it on us. And I think that's the thing that people are feeling the most. And, you know, quite frankly, you had Republicans pushing against this the last couple of years. You had Republicans pushing against this, but we didn't have the House and we didn't have the Senate. What we had was a tyrannical president, a media set of organizations that were complicit in this narrative that extended not only to traditional media, but over to big tech and social media as well, right? And there are people I know of in this room, I won't point anybody out, but there's people in this room who would make a post, they get banned because they're questioning something. And that's wrong, folks. That's not American. And I think that is the piece that's causing all of us dis-ease. And I think even people who are on the center left, if they're honest with themselves, they recognize that that's a threat to them too.
So along those lines, just throwing out some random memories from memory lane. The Department of Justice labeling parents terrorists who objected to what their school systems were doing. The FBI showing up at the homes of pro-life activists and then dragging them away. At one point, the FBI's, now we know from the Danchenko and Sussman trials that the FBI knew, and not just knew, but helped fabricate the myth that Donald Trump and his associates and people in the Republican Party were conspiring, with Russia to commit, to betray our country. Charges that could carry the death penalty. And they make all of this up, and for years get away with spreading this out through their willing accomplices in the media and so on, and gaslighting the entire country, and now nobody is punished. This just made a footnote in the news a couple of days ago. We now have evidence from litigation from recent litigation that, yes, it's true, Lois Lerner at the IRS, you remember 2014-15, when, when conservative nonprofits were getting smoked by the IRS. And they were trying to do the right thing and get tax exempt status, and in reply were having the ETF sent to their homes and completely inappropriate interrogatories and so on. Okay, sorry, this is their time, not mine. I'm just throwing out random stuff here, and now we know that Lois Lerner did, in fact, through finally discovery, a judge delayed, the release of these documents, intentionally sat on it for years, and so that we would all forget. And now they release it, and now we've got this evidence, and nothing happens. What can you guys do if you win this race to fix this?
Forrest, I think this goes back to how bloated we've become, right? When you don't know, we'll use an Army analogy, right? You don't give a lieutenant a company's worth of equipment because it's so much equipment and they don't have the experience or skill set to inventory it all. And what ends up happening is you end up losing that one incredibly important widget, say like maybe a tank firing pin, for instance, right? The tank doesn't work without that sinking firing pin. Like that's not how that thing works. You got to have the firing pin, duh. But what we have found as we look back at how our politicians have hidden themselves behind this bureaucracy, whether it's the EPA or it's the Department of Justice is a good example, or the IRS, have you seen any of our elected officials ever recommend trimming this down? I mean, we've had a family member, we've had multiple Republicans in our representative class for DC, for Alaska. And have you heard any of them recommend anything about tearing this mess down? Not one. In fact, when the mandates came out, did you hear Lisa or Dan say anything about it? Neither did I. Only one guy said anything about it that I can think of, and the dude is from Kentucky. I mean, that right there should tell you something. The two-party system is broken. Like, that's what that comes down to. When you look at all those events that you just labeled, every one of our bureaucrats have funded those, and politicians have funded those entities repetitively.
Would you shut down the FBI?
Oh, I'd shut that sucker down. You better believe it until someone takes control over there. You know what I would probably do, honestly? I would find a normal Alaskan to put in charge of that thing. I would. I think typical Alaskans can make better decisions than bureaucrats, or politicians for that matter. Well, you better believe I would. And I would want them reinstated. They serve a good function, but currently they're leaderless.
So one of the primary functions of the Congress is oversight. And there is far too little oversight of the bureaucracy that has been created by the Congress. And there are members of Congress who take this part of their job very seriously. One was mentioned, Rand Paul, right, on the Senate side. On the House side, Jim Jordan. Jim Jordan is somebody who has been calling out this sort of behavior from the bureaucracy for years. And he's not alone. There are other members of the Congress that are doing this work, but there's not enough. There are far too many that are complicit, or they're lazy, right? Or they're interested in getting elected next time, so they don't want to put their head up and actually say the truth. And we've got to have more people in the Congress that are willing to speak the truth and call people out. That's our job, right? As citizens, to elect those people who are willing to take people before a committee and call them on the carpet. Now, I've spent my career in technology, right? Rand Paul has expertise in medicine because that's where he spent his career. And it's helpful if we have people in the Congress that have some specific knowledge about particular industries, because when you haul a CEO of Pfizer or the CEO of a social media company before the committee, you need to be able to ask questions and have the high ground and know whether they're telling the truth or not. And I can tell you right now, the part of oversight that I feel like I can add a lot of value to in the Congress is big tech, because I understand it. And I can tell you right now, what is happening to this nation, and this gets back to your previous question as well. Why do we feel that sense of dis-ease? Because we're being subtly manipulated through big tech. When Google changes the search results that are recommended to you, you have a sense, you don't know, but you have a sense something's not right. We saw that in the last presidential election, right? When Facebook or Twitter decides that they're going to suppress, shadow ban, and prevent information from flowing from both sides of the aisle, you get a sense, why am I seeing this in my feed? Why am I being told these things? I know they're not true. Because you're not getting the opportunity to see the other side, right? And so many of the times that this happens, they're not even telling you. There's a major publisher of conservative content in this state right now that is currently shadow banned 5 days before the election on Facebook. That is happening right now.
Yeah, but she's been censoring me since the beginning.
It's a huge problem. It's a huge problem, right? And it's the kind of thing that you're going to need somebody in Congress who's willing to take those people on. I'm willing to take them on. It's something that I've been talking about for the last year. And this is not a Democrat or Republican or Libertarian issue. This is an American issue. And everyone in the Congress should be taking this seriously. Right now, I think, by and large, you don't hear about it from the left because they're the benefactors of it. They're the beneficiaries of it, rather. Right? But the American people are missing out. They're missing out on information, and it's being subtly managed by just a couple of groups that are doing this.
I'd like to ask
Mr. Forrest, can I think this is an important note. Would you say, Nick, that because there were corporate protection regulations placed by politicians and bureaucrats, and that's how we've got Twitter and these other social media entities where they are today, not to mention government funding for those things?
Yeah, I think we've got to take Section 230 seriously and remove the protections for social media platforms that are actually actively managing content, because they become editors. And I think that's the appropriate vector to go after these companies. I think the Trump administration had that right when they were trying to press the Congress to take action under Section 230. I think that's what we have to do. That was modified.
That's an antitrust exemption?
This is not an antitrust exemption, it's an exemption for it's a liability exemption for platforms that don't become editorialists.
Oh, I see.
And what we've done now is we've created editorial activity on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, WhatsApp, all these various platforms, and they've basically violated the intent and purpose of their Section 230 waiver.
So what that shows you is the government tried to effect a change or a position and it failed. It's the law of unintended consequences. That's what separates a libertarian from a Republican, period. We see that there's second, third order effects down the road. We understand that. That's why we place it in your hands to make your own darn decision. You figure it out, Mike. Right? You figure it out, Malik. You don't need me, a central planner, making some rule that 10, 15, 20 years down the road has unintended consequences that we fail to account for. That's the difference. Thanks.
Well, it's not the difference between this Republican and this Libertarian.
Okay, little change of pace here. We have not declared war since June 5th, 1942 against Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria. So does that mean we have not been at war?
So I'm a firm believer that under the Constitution, the Congress needs to be the authority on declarations of war. This is pretty clear, actually, in the Constitution. And, I will tell you, we have entered into a number of these conflicts unconstitutionally. We've sent men and women into these war zones to fight other people's battles, to be quite honest, right? And we spent trillions of dollars of U.S. taxpayers' money to do so. And the truth of the matter is the Iraq war justification was dubious at best, and let no one mistake, these comments that I'm making have nothing to do with my support for the men and women who serve in our armed forces. I am 100% fully supportive of them, but in the Congress you have a solemn duty to ensure that when you send Americans into harm's way, that you do so constitutionally, and you do so based on the basis of American interests, right? And so many times what I've said about our national defense apparatus, the military-industrial complex, is that it's really not so much national defense as it is national offense. And this is wrong. This is absolutely wrong. We've got a gentleman here who has fought for our country, and I'm sure he's got much to say on this topic, but that's my view.
I know this bright gentleman, an Alaskan through and through, and he made a comment earlier that said war is an industry. And I don't think you can make it any simpler than that. Having been at the tip of the spear for 32 months or so, I would simply tell you that that is absolutely accurate. War is definitely an industry. There are two things that the federal government is really, really, really good at: spending your money and killing. Period. They are excellent at those two things. And they will do it at a drop of a hat. And they'll do it at 40,000 feet, or they'll do it on the ground with someone like me in a bayonet. They don't, that's what we're trained to do. And the federal government does it exquisitely. I would simply say, adding on to Mr. Nick, when I took the oath as an enlisted man, and then again as an officer in the Army, it was to support and defend the United States Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Not to go in and support the nation building of some other country. Especially when we weren't sowing seeds of freedom and liberty there. That's what's key to this. I would simply say that when we start electing folks, we need to have a bigger picture of what's in mind. Remember that war is definitely an industry. And they have some serious lobbying effects. I mean, we heard Robb earlier today talk about the lobbyists just here. I mean, if you think it's bad here in Juneau, which should be here in Willow if I had my way, but if we could make that leap from Juneau, just imagine what it is in DC. You know, I hung my hopes up on the Tea Party. You better believe I did. And pretty much they've all failed us. I mean, even the guy that I like, even Mike Lee wanted more COVID money for you. Even Ted Cruz wanted more money for COVID relief, which meant that little ones were going to be paying on that was going to add to the debt. So when we look at it, these continual wars, just think about that debt, $31 trillion. I think it's actually $31.4 trillion right now. But by the time we go to election, it'll be probably 31.8 trillion, unless you're using Sarah math, and I think she said 34 trillion or whatever she said. But I mean, that's really what it comes down to. So I hope I answered your question, Forrest.
Yeah, and I really wanted to get at how we go about making war, and not necessarily the advisability of these particular wars. Some of us may actually have believed that,
Sure, we should.
the surge in Iraq was well advised, but
I don't know, I was there for it, and no. In fact, I lost 6 soldiers. I lost 4 before then, and I lost 6 after that. I had to write those letters. Painful. That's all I can say.
But do you think that, yeah, but do you think that as a result of their sacrifice, that Iraq was pacified by 2000?
That's a really ugly question.
Beg your pardon?
That's a conflicted question. No, I don't.
I mean,
I don't think their lives were worth that. At the end of the day, Iraq wasn't pacified by the brute strength of America. It was pacified by people in Iraq stepping up. You could take all the bullets we've ever manufactured and it wouldn't have done anything. You can't make enough bullets to kill bad guys. I know that for a fact. At the end of the day, freedom and liberty are only driven by the people who live there. I don't want to steal a line, the tree of liberty is watered by blood or anything like that, but I will simply tell you that if those countries really want freedom and liberty, they better grasp it with both hands and not rely on a U.S. soldier to come and do it for them.
I do want to, and there are some questions here, and I did want to get to, foreign policy and use of force and so on. But I guess for the moment, I just wanted to focus on how we go to war. How does the Congress, because if either of you are to win, you're serving in Congress, what do you do to make a contribution and ensure that the Congress takes back the power to declare war from the executive branch?
Yeah, this is where you've got to have the cooperation of the other 434 members on the House side, right? You have to have enough cooperation to be able to vote this down, right? When there's an unauthorized executive order that's gone into effect, you've got to do that. There are ways that you can assert authority through the judiciary to try to press this issue. But so often we've seen it even in the last 3 years, the judiciary doesn't want to get involved in some of the more controversial topics that are happening in our nation right now. It's very difficult to stand up and say, oh, well, I'm going to do this, and they say, you don't have standing, right? They will refuse to take up an issue because someone doesn't have standing, or a state doesn't have standing, or a member of Congress doesn't have standing. So we've got to get enough members elected that will work together in order to put a stop to this. And again, as I mentioned a moment ago, there are strong, liberty-minded members in Congress, but we've got to get more of them there. But it's up to us. Again, it's up to the people of the United States to recognize this problem and put those people in place. But moving away from the procedure for a moment, getting to the heart of the matter, we get to that question of debt, how much debt was created when we went into these nations, and what did we have to show for it at the end? What did the American taxpayer have to show for it? What did that next generation have to show for it? Those are serious questions that we have to answer. We're going to have to answer those questions, not just for us, but for those kids, for my 10-year-old son, for your kids, right? Because that burden is getting so large. Not only are we not going to be able to pay it off in the traditional sense, we're going to pay it off in the non-traditional sense, inflation. And that's what's happening. That's literally what we're experiencing right now. We're paying the dividend of 70, 80 years of bad decision making, and it's coming home to roost on us right now.
Forrest, you mentioned about the process. So currently, all of those wars are listed under something called an authorization of use of military force. There's roughly 4 of them, maybe 5, depending on which one you want to count, because some of them are buried within this thing called the National Defense Authorization Act. No, we shouldn't use those, period. We should not use any of the AUMF process ever again, never. Because it's disingenuous to the American people. They don't necessarily understand what they're signing up for. They just see it as another bill. And the next thing you know, off goes little Johnny, you know, or my kid. And he's a knucklehead, right? So I'm not willing to do that again. And if it were me, we would never have another authorization of use of military force. You know what that truly was? That was politicians and bureaucrats hiding behind the executive branch. That's what that was. It was another example of politicians hiding behind the bureaucracy. They were Pontius Pilate. They washed their hands of it. And they gave it to the DOD, and those knuckleheads ran crazy with it. I mean, that is a good example of a lack of oversight and, quite frankly, a lack of procedural etiquette, right? Because it should have just gone straight to declare war and be done with it. But instead, we did a backhand move. You know who that really also benefited? The military-industrial complex. Like, they made a crap ton of money, and that is my professional word, a crap ton. And we're not going to get that money back, by the way. Like, that's been spent. So I would simply say, when we start looking at how big the government's getting, like Nick had mentioned earlier, don't lose sight of the fact that oversight is impossible. The AUMF is a good example of that. Can you name one congressman who flew over to Iraq? I saw 2. 32 months of combat, I saw 2. And one of them, I wish she hadn't showed up. She didn't make it any easier for me. Right? And then I had one bureaucrat show up, a State Department head. She showed up, and she made it really painful. You know, I would just ask for bureaucrats to stop helping. Right? To stop helping. And I would ask politicians to stop helping bureaucrats. Right? That's what we've got to get back to. And Forrest, I hope that answered your question about the direction.
Let's connect that issue to open up discussion about fiscal and monetary policy, but I'd like to segue with jogging all of your memories about a famous episode when Ron Paul was running for president. I forget if it was 2004 maybe, when he was on the stage, and by the way, I was not a Ron Paul fanboy,
but you should be, Forrest.
Yes, right, you. But I think, you know, in looking back, some of us should recall and reflect on what he said in this presidential debate when asked about the question of foreign policy and the question of the advisability of America projecting its power abroad. He said, we won't be able to. We won't be able to. We'll be broke. Right? And so this brings up the sort of the fiscal fiscal and monetary policy and the financial condition of our country right now. We're above 100% GDP in national debt. We are seeing, you know, even to move rates up to 4%, which, you know, is nothing compared to what Volcker do. We're seeing reverberations all around the world of our entire global financial system cratering and so on. We're in big, and this isn't talked about enough. So take it away.
This is my space right here. I love talking about this issue. And I wish I had a whiteboard with me. But the truth of the matter is, you're absolutely right. The United States, and let's just talk about recent history. We can talk about how we ended up getting here. I mean, when Reagan was president, people were worried about $1 trillion in debt. Today, $1 trillion is part of a spending package, right? But nevertheless, here we are with $31 trillion and rising rapidly in debt. We printed so much cash in order to finance the government's spending in the last few years that we actually increased the money supply by almost double in 3 years. The Federal Reserve had to step in as the buyer of last resort. The buyer of last resort, because there was no other buyer. Even the nation of China couldn't use its foreign currency reserves to purchase enough US treasuries to satisfy the government's spending appetite these last 3 years. Now some will say, oh, well, it was an emergency. Well, it was an emergency because the government created the emergency in the first place. Let's be clear about that. But nevertheless, here we've got this challenge now where we're structurally trapped. And I think this was Ron Paul's point many years ago. We're structurally trapped because we no longer have the ability to raise interest rates in any meaningful way, because when we do, the government has to refinance its debt periodically, and it enters into the public markets to do so. And as it refinances its debt, it has to refinance that debt at higher and higher interest rates, which means a larger percentage of our tax revenue goes to finance interest payments. So all that money that's going out in tax revenue is getting eaten up by interest. What's interesting right now is we're not anywhere near a balanced budget, okay? But did you know that tax revenue today, in the fiscal year that ended September 30th of this year, we had the second highest tax receipts in the nation's history. Not on a nominal basis, not on a hard dollar basis, on a percentage of GDP basis. The only time that it's been higher is at the peak during World War II. This is a huge problem, and we see a case study happening right now in Japan. So Japan, they used to be 110 yen to the dollar just 18 months ago. Right now, they're about 140 yen to the dollar and rising. Why? Because they have allowed their debt to GDP ratio to hit 230, 240%. And as an industrialized nation, there's no way that you cannot maintain that. It's gotten so bad that Japan has no idea how they're going to rein that back in. And so, if we don't get this under control, and it may, honestly, it may be too late to get it under control. We're going to be real honest about it, maybe too late.
And then what?
Well, there's two things that happen when that happens. You have two choices to make, and you can see the Fed and the Treasury are trying to figure out how to make this choice. You can institute government austerity, which reduces government spending dramatically, but you also have to lower the interest rate. And when you lower the interest rate, the dollar relative to other currencies drops, which juices inflation. The only way to fix this problem over the long haul is to become a producing nation again, because right now the primary export of the United States is the United States dollar. And we lose that reserve currency status, we're going to have all kinds of problems in this nation because we do not produce enough of what we consume.
Chris?
So Nick did a really good job of laying out how we got here, right? Understand we elected officials, that got us there. That's how we got there. It wasn't by magic, it was by election. Like that's the outcome, that's the second, third order effect of holding your nose and voting for the lesser of two evils, right there. Classic example. I'm a little bit more optimist than Nick here. I think we can pull it back. As a soldier, you're always an optimist, even when things are really, really, really bad and you're out of fuel and ammo. I would say that right now what we truly need to do is put the brakes on immediately. Stop spending now. Potentially we need to go back to a 2000 budget, year 2000, and operate under that. That is going to be financially painful for every bureaucrat that I know. We probably need to reduce the number of federal employees, which currently sits at 2.3 million. And that's a lot. Oh, by the way, their average salary is $90K. So I'm confident that the United States will be just fine if we remove 5 out of 10. I'm pretty confident we will be okay. And that would save us a lot of money, $90,000 per. So it can be done. Yes, it'll be painful. I don't think we should hire any more IRS agents. 87,000 of them, or whatever the number was. I personally think we should go through DOD and at a minimum take 1 out of every 7 and give them to the private world, if you know what I'm saying. I think we ought to move back most of our bases from overseas. When you have a U.S. base on foreign soil, you pay 4 entities for that foreign base. You lease the land, you pay for the utilities, you pay for foreign workers on that land, and then you also pay a subsidiary fee, call it a beautification fee, for the area nearby that military base. There's 4 things you pay for. And we haven't even talked about the U.S. equipment there, or the U.S. service members there, or the DOD civilians that are there. That expenditure is insane. It's actually equivalent to like the bottom 100 countries' GDP combined. That's what we pay DOD to run. I mean, it's insane. Like, we've got to get that under control. And Nick is right. There's like only one way to do this. Otherwise, the value of the dollar just plummets. And when that happens, we all lose. You better start investing in wheelbarrows to go get a loaf of bread. And we've got to get it under control. Obviously, as a libertarian, I'm way more austere than the other 2 parties, because I simply think that, Herman, you can do it on your own, brother. I am confident of it. Once we get past the spending, Nick's also right. We have got to get the Treasury, and we've got to get the, I forgot the names now. Thanks, the Reserve. We got to get those 2 people on board. Personally, I think we ought to audit them. We ought to take them to task, find out who their leader is, and fire him, and then get someone else in there that can take control of the situation. None of our elected representatives have even ever contemplated that, except for Ron Paul, have ever contemplated putting any of these people in through an audit process. I'll give you one more example of an audit gone wrong. 2014, the DOD was told, you will have an audit done by 2018. We expect it on my desk at Congress. It is currently 2022. Guess what? Guess what isn't complete yet? The DOD audit. That's correct. They come up with all kinds of unique excuses why. These are the people that we trust our sons and daughters with, and they can't find their equipment or their money? Are you kidding me? Oh, no way. Nope. That's unacceptable. Take it away.
What?
I'd just like to point something out here. There's a reason why you see these 2 candidates up here and these other 2 candidates, Sarah Palin and Mary Peltola, are not up here.
That's correct.
Because they knew full well this is going to be a deep discussion with details and conversation. And they didn't want any part of that. Right? You got 2 candidates up here that have studied the issues, that are prepared to go to Congress on behalf of the state of Alaska. And you got 2 other candidates that are interested in those rhetorical talking points, drill baby drill and whatever else. And it's not going to fix the problems that we have. You can't fix the problems of this nation if you don't understand the root cause of the problem. Right now we have a Congress filled with people on the right and the left that say, what does this button do? And they press the button and go, wow, did you see that? They're actually surprised to see that the actions that they've taken in Congress are that those actions directly led to the inflationary environment that we have today. If you look at the left, they say, oh no, it has nothing to do with it, it's a supply chain issue. Really? You doubled the monetary supply, and you didn't change the number of goods and services available. So you have more dollars chasing the same fixed numbers of goods and services, and you're surprised to see inflation? Did you not have a high school economics class?
No.
How do these people get into office? We put them there. We can't put those people into office, at least not from Alaska. We can control that.
Just following up with both of you and those comments. We began talking about the bloat in government and that the government has become a kind of, bloated beast, and that, we can audit, we can do oversight, and so on. But this thing has now grown fangs. And you can see, and this is part of the change that I see, which is that when these officers of the executive branch are hailed into Congress for committee and subcommittee hearings, they flaunt their immunity. They know that they're not, I mean, in the famous video of Peter Strzok, if you have seen it, that video clip of him in front of the Judiciary Committee, and they know they're not going to get caught, nothing's going to happen to them, and then when they get inquiries for, subpoenas for documents from Republican committees, they slow walk them. Committees have to go to judges 10 times, they're DC judges, so they slow walk it too, or give adverse verdicts that don't make sense or whatever. And when they finally get the documents, every single page is redacted. This just goes on and on and on, and they get away with it, and nothing happens. And I mean, for the life of me, sometimes when I think about this, I'm taxed too. And I bet you all these people here and these people who are watching, when they hear this, it frustrates the living daylights out of them, because this isn't right. This is not free and fair government. So I'm saying this just to try to maybe push you a little, to really think about, maybe I speak for you all, some folks out there. I don't know how, I'm a professor of political science, and it really taxes my brain to try to think about how we do. I don't think just oversight alone can do it, unless you can build up oversight into some kind of fearsome tool, because they don't have any law enforcement power. That has to be routed through DOJ, and they just sit on it.
Forrest, we already have a force that can do that. We just haven't energized them yet. Continue down this pathway, and you're going to get some pretty angry Americans. And I don't want to bring in ranked choice voting, because I'm sure most of you guys didn't care for it. I benefited from it. But an open primary can fix this. Term limits can fix this. Adherence to the OPM framework for civilian employees can fix this. But what America desperately needs, we need voters who give a fart. Now, excuse my professional language, but we need voters that care.
Oh, I think they will.
And,
when they ratchet up the pressure and liberty comes even increasingly under pressure, they will care.
Well,
but here's the problem with what you're saying.
We induce violence. That's the problem I'm concerned about.
Well, it does me too. Less because I'm concerned that our folks might cause some trouble out there, but that the government might use that as a pretext to crack down on liberty even more, which is why...
They absolutely will.
Yeah, so I don't think term limits is going to fit. I mean, pardon me, I'm not in this debate, and we're thinking out loud, let's say. And honestly, I'm just being sincere here, and I would just say that I think both of you or anybody who is running for federal office right now should be forgiven for not having glib answers to these problems, because they're not easy. They're really tough.
No, but sometimes we induce complexity for complexity's sake.
But at least acknowledging that this is very serious is a good start.
Well, it's extremely serious, and you're both correct, right? The population can be pressed to a point that's not healthy for the American Republic, and let me just editorialize. We're not a democracy, we're a republic. You hear people, another form of gaslighting from the left right now, talking about how there's a threat to democracy out there. Okay, we're a republic, let's get that clear. But we have representative government in this country, and we need to, again, make sure we're sending representatives who can take on these challenges. When oversight fails, we have a process by which we can make bigger law. Right? Now, I'm not a fan of making new laws, but we have laws on the books right now that protect this bureaucracy and prevent the ability for people to actually get fired. when someone's failing to do their job, or they have, even worse, become activists in their job, you know how hard it is, you know how difficult it is to actually remove that person from their job as a federal employee?
Yes.
It's almost impossible to do it. That's because the law has created this hedge, this boundary that prevents these people from being moved out. That's a law that can be fixed. And lawmakers and policy makers, the representatives that you send to DC, have the ability to fix that. And I will tell you right now, I think that's one of the major root causes of the problems that we see with what I call the institutional bureaucracy. This fourth branch of government that sort of exists on its own. You hear from folks all the time, they sort of laugh when they come before Congress and they give the remarks, because they know they're going to outlast the people that are asking them the questions. And even the people that were called before Congress, and it was clear that they had violated the law, were allowed to get their retirements. Right? Nothing happened to them of consequence.
Just to shift gears, because I've got some varied questions here. And I apologize for asking this because it seems a little unseemly to ask how you would vote, because that's a private decision that you would both make. But given the fact that we have ranked choice voting, it is material, it seems to me, to ask, and if you want to refuse, that's fine, how each of you will vote. And I assume you put yourselves first, but after that, what?
I don't know if you guys have looked at the write-in candidates. There's some fantastic ones out there. I mean, there's two of them that are like, there's two that are pretty stinking awesome. That's what I'll just say. Do I think their politics are gone right? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. But do I think their heart is where it needs to be? You better believe I do. One of them wants to rebuild the VA, like gut it. That needs to happen. I mean, I'm telling you, it needs to happen. The other one is another vet, and he has a passion for fisheries management. You know, Nick's not a bad guy, don't get me wrong. I mean, I got 4 spots. But I really, those two really, I would simply say their heart is in it, right? And I know for a lot of people, they're like, oh my gosh, like, oh, what a bleeding liberal. That must be part of libertarian. I would simply say they've got passion for an answer and a fix. And I value that deeply.
I'd like to have some time for some foreign policy and some additional issues. So
Sure.
you're gonna go with write-in after yourself.
Currently, yeah.
Okay.
So you're not
Nick?
gonna vote for Nick then? So you're a traitor.
Oh, hey, that's all right, Jeff. But so here's the thing. Okay, one of the deficiencies actually of ranked choice voting as it was designed is we only have one place for a write-in candidate.
That is correct.
Yeah, which is a problem with the way the ballot's been designed. But look, I think that you should look at all the candidates. Take a look at all the candidates, right? I've already made my position clear on this. Obviously I want you to put me first. And, I think Chris By is a great guy. I've gotten to know him throughout the campaign. And it's incredible. We share very similar views on a number of topics. And I think the first time we went on the debate stage together, if you remember, I said, you're going to be surprised. We have very similar opinions. We do. So if you were to put Chris By second on my ballot, great. At least this guy's showing up for work. That's important, right? Obviously I'm a conservative. I'm on the right side of the aisle, so I think you should rank the right side of the aisle. Do that, in the order that you think is best for addressing the issues we're talking about tonight. I mean, that's what I'm going to do.
Okay, I'll ask both of you, where the Patriot Act is going to be coming up for renewal soon, reenactment. Could you say where your positions are?
Go ahead, buddy. I answer the last one first.
So I believe that the Patriot Act is one of the worst pieces of legislation
Amen.
to hit the House floor. I think it's awful, okay? This so-called Patriot Act does nothing but take freedoms away from everyday Americans. It authorizes domestic spying operations. And this is that act is anything but patriotic, and it's outlived its usefulness. It was not constitutional at the beginning, and I would not vote to reauthorize it.
100% concur with Nick. That is a firm no.
That really surprises me, given over the things you've said. I can see it. Okay, so let's talk about immigration, but also immigration and the executive branch and the Constitution, let's say. Okay, so I believe it was in 2010, the state of Arizona enacted a law to mobilize the police power of Arizona to protect them against the migration of foreigners who were crossing the border without sanction of U.S. law. So that law essentially was just assigning them the responsibility to do what the federal government should have been doing and exists to do, but was not doing. The Justice Department takes them to court. DC judge agrees, gets it struck down. Well, I can't remember which court it was, but it was. I wouldn't be surprised if I'm remembering correctly. So in that case, the judge basically sided with, they called that on the grounds of preemption, that the state was preempting federal government's powers in that case. And so Arizona was not allowed to protect itself from this influx of foreigners who were coming into our country without sanction of U.S. law. Fast forward to 2017, the state of California enacts a law signed by Governor Jerry Brown that declares that California is a sanctuary state and prohibits state of California officials, both state and local, from turning over foreigners who are here without sanction of U.S. law to the federal government. Isn't that sounds to me like a preemption of explicit powers for the naturalization of foreigners in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, but they were allowed to go scot-free. Now, according to Yale University, I think it was, well, more than 2 years ago, they came out with a study that estimated around 20 million foreigners are here in this country without sanction of U.S. law. And that in the last 2 years, since President Biden was president, 5 million more. That's 25 million people. That's the population of Poland has come into our country without sanction of U.S. law. And the courts and the executive branch, they are selectively enforcing the law where they want to, and then they're, exercising powers where they clearly do not have authority, a warrant in the Constitution, but then are flouting responsibilities that they are clearly charged with by the Constitution, all to fit their own, vision of the world as they would like, to make it. What the heck do we do about that?
Congress has to get off its butt. Literally, and I don't mean that figuratively. I think they ought to go to those locations and see what's going on down there. You get a lot of lip service from DC, but you know what you don't see a lot of? Action. And we've got to start sending people down there to the border. I've been to Del Rio. It's a fascinating place. You know that place is actually run by a Democrat? He was the first one to put up a wall? Yes, he did. He moved containers. He did it himself because he owned the construction company. I mean, people on the border are seeing this, and it's not a right or left issue. They're understanding that this is a tragedy on the way. And so they're doing everything they can. I think right now we're at a place because, again, going back to no checks and balances, I think we're at a place now where local people absolutely need to take control. We're there. And I use Del Rio's mayor as a good example of that. I met him. He's a fantastic dude. Not a great fisherman, but a fantastic dude. No, I'll put him on my boat any day. I've also met the gentleman in Nogales when I was in the service. There was a gentleman there. We did some work with Joint Task Force North, where they sent part of Fort Wainwright down there to go sit on the border and basically watch the incoming mess. And it's a tragedy. Like, it has to be fixed. And you'll know from our party platform that a lot of us think that open borders are the way to go. I would simply say that's not true for me, and it's not true for the other folks that I know. We simply think that a fence makes good neighbors, but we've got to have a gate that makes sense. We've got to relook our immigration policy right now. I think it's 22 years old with some extra ads here and there, but it's still 20 some years old and it needs to be updated. Do I think we should be taking everybody? No. No, we don't have room for everybody currently. In our entitlement package, currently, we couldn't afford it. So we've got to come up with a way that makes sense. And frankly, I think it comes from you guys. I mean, like my website. Most of my website's built on Alaskans because they've got good ideas. And as a representative, I'm assuming Nick is the same way. We represent the people, not necessarily corporations and everything else. So we are expecting good ideas to come from you, Mike, or Jeff, or anybody else in this audience. If there's a good idea, don't hold out on us, let us know. And we bring that forward, we bounce it against the Constitution, we bounce it against the budget, and we determine whether or not it's personal responsibility or not. And if it determines that we can actually execute this, then we execute it. But that's how things get done. And I've just seen that tragedy up front, and I blame the Biden administration currently, hands down. I have seen exactly what a 4-year-old looks like wandering across the desert, and it's heartbreaking. I mean, gut-wrenching. And we simply have to do better. We're Americans. We put men on the moon. We can fix this.
So it absolutely is a tragedy. Part of the reason it's such a tragedy is because we have an administration in the executive branch that has essentially created an open invitation for people around the world to come to the United States without rule of law. And so people do, right? And they come here illegally, and we see the tragedy when, someone's got a truck full of illegal immigrants that are trying to cross the border, and they abandon it because they're worried about they're going to get in trouble, and nearly everyone in that truck dies. Those deaths are on the Biden administration and the people that cooperate with that sort of illicit human trafficking, because that's what it is. Now, a porous border like this is inconsistent with national sovereignty. If you're going to have a nation, you have to have borders. I have been to about 35 countries in my life, and I can guarantee you this, I've never just wandered in. I've got a passport in my hand, and if necessary, a visa to get access to that country, and I wouldn't dare go in any other way, because those nations that I travel to, they enforce the rules. Can you imagine walking into another nation and ending up in one of their prisons, even for a couple of days? It'd be a nightmare, right? We have got to enforce the laws that we have. Now, when those laws are not enforced, back to the premise of the question, we've got to look to our governors of these border states, right? And they've got to assert their authority and their jurisdictional capacity. And we do see that with the governor of Texas, Governor Abbott. We do see that with the governor of Florida, Governor DeSantis. That's what it takes. Because when the federal government falls down on their duty, it's up to those border states to step up, right? I wish that weren't the case. I wish it were a simple solution. But I think that we need more governors around this nation, and even in Alaska, asserting states' rights. Because those states, including Alaska, are being run over by a federal government bureaucracy that is selectively enforcing the law.
That's a pretty good point. The states' right thing is terribly important to me. And it goes through all kinds of facets, right, and all kinds of magnitudes. And ensuring that we've got the right kind of person there in DC that's advocating for state rights is critical. Because at the end of the day, decisions made closer to the problem set have the best resolutions every time. If we continually rely on a central planner for these, we're going to end up with just what we've got right now. And we didn't, I don't know, I remember when I was a little one, my grandfather used to take me across Laredo where his dad and mom lived, and we never needed a passport. It was never a really big deal. And so I wonder what has changed that's done that. My guess is it's the socioeconomic development or non-development in those countries that's feeding this. And my foreign policy is very much America-centric because we have been doing, I'm not touching you game for every country around this globe, and it's come to roost right now, and we find ourselves in all kinds of military entanglements because we're harassing everybody, even when we don't mean to.
That might be a good way to segue into current international hotspots. Let's talk about Ukraine. Chris, why don't you go first? I would like to give the combat veteran some pride of place here.
I appreciate it.
And the question is, this is an audience question, are we doing too much, about right, not enough? Yeah.
I see we're doing way too much of the lethal end of this. Way too much. Currently, there are 4 RQ-4s, those are Global Hawks, that are moving in and around Ukrainian airspace, Romanian airspace, just inside the Black Sea, and I think there's one more parked near Georgia. So if we're trying to get into World War III, that's an excellent way to do it. That is a fantastic way to do it. So that system can do 5 different suites of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. It is an amazing piece of equipment. Thank you, taxpayers. However, it's currently being used to feed real-time data to the Ukrainians. And it is going to entangle us in a war if we are not terribly careful. The idea that we are going to push an unlimited budget of military hardware to another country, to me, is unbelievable. Yet we can't fix things in our own states. I mean, that just, we're not taking care of ourselves, and we're going to find ourselves even worse condition than we are right now. If it were up to me, I would reduce most of our lethal spending probably by 50% easily, and I would increase a little bit of the humanitarian aid, simply because we want to be good neighbors. But quite frankly, we need to pull back and take care of ourselves. At $31 trillion of debt, we simply can't afford to maintain this.
Yeah, I believe that we are doing too much. You know, you look at the amount of money that we're spending over there. You know, where's Europe? This is on their backyard, right? And what we saw under the Trump administration was a president that was willing to call out the nations of NATO and say, hey, you have systemically underinvested on national defense. Not just for the last year or two, but for decades. And that sustained underinvestment where, you know, they have a 2% of GDP commitment that they make under NATO for investing in national defense. And if many of them were under 1%, that doesn't sound like a lot, but that's half of what they should be doing. And it's half of what they should be doing for decades. And when you have that much weakness, you encourage aggression. And that's what we saw. That's what we are seeing. We're seeing aggression, right? Now, the United States, let's be real clear here, is part of the problem as it relates to Ukraine. We have been meddling in those affairs for decades, since the fall of the Soviet Union. And we have some culpability in this. We've used Ukraine as sort of a chess piece on the U.S. foreign policy board. And, you know, eventually you get bit when you do that. When you interfere with the affairs of other nations in these ways, when you're actively engaged in regime change, right? Think about that for just 1 second. Regime change. What does that mean when the United States goes into another foreign country's operating norms and says, we're gonna swap out that leader? Doesn't that sort of sound similar to what was thrown out as an accusation in 2016? People should be ashamed that we engage in the domestic activities of other nations, so much so that we were willing to swap out leaders. What happened to self-determination? I thought that was the basis of being an American. It's wrong. And this foreign policy of ours, of meddling in other people's affairs, bites us over and over and over again. It's what pulled us into the Middle East in the first place.
Gentlemen, actually, we're running out of time. I'm sorry, Chris. So I just want to give both of you just the chance to kind of take a minute to, to wrap up a minute or two. I think we're finished at 9, right? Yeah. So, but I just want to say thank you very much for putting up with me And good luck to you both. And I hope we'll be able to do this again on your re-election campaign. So, would you like to go first, Nick?
So this is a critical election. I know politicians get up here and they tell you that every 2 years, hey, this is the most important election of your life. I'm not going to say it's the most important one of your life, but it's one of the most important ones. And it's important because the future of our state is at stake. The future of Alaska is at stake. Alaska's not just like some other state. We actually are really unique. We're almost 20% of the United States landmass. We're more than half the coastline in the United States. We have nearly every critical mineral on the critical minerals list in Alaska. We have abundant oil, gas, coal. We have rare earths here, hard to find in other areas of the United States. Base metals and precious metals, abundant timber resources. More fish resources in Alaska than anywhere else in the nation. But we're not going to unlock those resources for the benefit of the people of this state or this nation if we don't have someone in the Congress that can make what I call the business case for Alaska. And I tell people, look, the resources of this world are being developed somewhere. They're being developed somewhere. You've got a phone in your pocket or your purse. You've got a car that you drove here tonight. You've got a house somewhere that you're living, right? Where did those resources come from? I can tell you, they're coming from nations like China and Afghanistan and Russia and the Congo. And whether you're on the left or the right or the middle, the truth of the matter is those resources are coming from areas where they don't care about the environment. They don't care about child labor, utilizing child labor, in some cases even slave labor, modern day slave labor, to extract those resources. And I tell people, I don't care where you're at on this issue. If you care about the earth and you care about humanity, you would demand that that work be done in the very best jurisdictions worldwide. And the very best jurisdiction worldwide for resource development is Alaska. I want to be that advocate for the state of Alaska. We've talked about a number of other important issues here tonight. Getting our federal spending under control. Electing people that actually understand the dynamics of baseline economics. So that when they hit that button or they pull that lever, they know what the consequence is likely to be. You've got some great choices here. It's disappointing to see other candidates in this race didn't take time to come to this forum. But as I mentioned earlier, you know why they didn't. Because we're having an actual conversation that lasts more than 45 seconds.
Right on.
And I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I humbly request your first place vote. And if you don't give me your first one, I hope you give me your second one. I'll let Chris take it from here. Thanks.
I appreciate this. This is way more, Michael, than just a forum, right? It's actually a true discussion. And that's unlike anything that we have done thus far. And that's pretty big and sweet, actually. So if you're looking for a model to kind of continue forward with the next election, this would be one. Obviously, if there was two other people here, we might not have had the flexibility that we got today, but it has been actually really beneficial for myself, probably for Nick as well. A lot of people keep asking me, why did you do this? And I simply say I didn't do this. I stole this line from a guy named Havel. He used to be the de facto president of Czechoslovakia. The KGB kept trying to kill this guy, and he kept buying new Mercedes-Benzes and like speeding down and outracing the KGB in their clunky little Russian vehicles. And someone said, Havel, why are you doing this? And he said, we don't do this because of a great chance of success. We do this because it's right. And that's why we started this campaign. Because I just seen so many poor candidates being pushed upon us. And then the outcome, I don't know how many of you guys have voted for somebody and then prayed that they would do the right thing when they got to wherever the elected position they went to. And then you're sorely disappointed and you're like, oh, sweet mercy, why did I send this person there? Like, that's happened to me more times than I care to imagine. I mean, in some cases at the presidential level. And so that's why we started to do this. And it wasn't something I stepped into. I like being a fishing guide. But it was something that I was drawn to because I like service. I like serving my community. I like being a soccer coach. I like teaching young people how to shoot guns safely. I like meeting folks. And that is the one thing I would like to leave with you guys today. In 2 years, we're going to be doing this mess all over again. Well, probably a year and some change. I encourage everybody in this audience to run. I will tell you the most amazing story that I've run into thus far is we always think about Alaska being beautiful and awesome and grandeur and all this other junk that we see when we look north. We see McKinley, right? Or Denali rather. But I will tell you that it's the people that make this place phenomenal. And I have met thousands of incredibly bright people that could be sitting here right now between us or at that table right now, and they would do an excellent job. Some have degrees, some don't. They're just normal Alaskans. And I've met a number of them. So when you get on the news and you see all these bad things happening, just remember that your neighbors are picking sweet. And if they're not, the next guy down the house is. And I firmly would stop at anybody's house if I needed help in this state. I wouldn't even think twice about it. And that's the cool thing about running. So at the end of the day, absolutely vote for one of us at a minimum, right? Both of us. Hell, you got ranked choice voting. But the next thing I would simply say is run. Take the opportunity, please. With an open primary, anybody can run. You don't have to submit to a card-carrying member. It could be anybody. And I greatly appreciate that opportunity. I know I wouldn't be here without it. That is not lost on me. Thanks, Forrest.
Gentlemen, thank you very much, and thank you everyone for being present this long to watch this debate. And now Michael Chambers will say some concluding remarks.
There you go. Well, did you like this? How do you turn this thing? There you go.
Testing? Yeah. Did you like this type of forum? Yeah. Certainly, it's a long evening because we had the ConCon and then we had the representatives, but I just want to end by, I'm one of the directors of Alaska Freedom Alliance, and I want to thank the Alaska Media Research Center for stepping up and assisting in this process. I don't normally quote Woody Allen, but I'm going to. He said 95% of success is showing up. Thank you.
Nice to you guys, too. Okay.
Don't expect me to stay up very late.
Yeah, I love it.
I tried to explain it to somebody, and they're like, no, you're going to.
Thank you, my fellow Alaskans, for tuning in here tonight. You can find this video currently on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and tomorrow, within the next 12 hours, also on Rumble, all at Politidic. If this was live, which is just about ready not to be, you can also watch this at politidic.com. And while you go to politidic.com, click that support button. Your proceeds made this possible today to be able to do, and I thank you so much. And I'm just going to take 1 second here because I want to show off the newest thing that your support was able to get for us. And it really made today's broadcast well worthwhile. And I'd like to thank you all for tuning in here today. And again, please don't forget to like and share this video. Informed Alaskans are educated Alaskans, and then they actually vote for candidates that care about Alaska, not just the swamp that's out there controlling their special interests, funneling our money into their pockets instead of ours. In just 1 second, I want to show you what I was able to pick up with your support today. I am. Alrighty, folks, you can see it right there. That is the new tripod for the camera. Hopefully you can see that pretty good. This tripod is sweet. Thank you all for making this possible. Have yourselves a great day. And again, don't forget to like and share. Appreciate your help and your support.
Do you have a card or a channel or something?
Just 1 second here.
Sure.